Good evening, everybody. Another episode of Mormonism Live. Tonight, we're going to talk about an interview that is alleged to have taken place in, I believe, 1839 with Joseph Smith Sr., the father of the prophet. And the trouble is that it's not actually spoken out loud and recorded until 1870. Tonight, we're going to go through that conversation and try to parse out what parts are trustworthy as being original to the story that Joseph Smith Jr. and his family told, and which parts maybe are misremembrances or misstatements for one reason or another. Tonight on Mormonism Live. RFM, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Yes, misstatements can happen in the best of families. For instance, you said 1839 instead of 1829.
The interview was in 1829?
Yeah.
Okay. So 40 years. Okay.
Over 40 years later, this interview, this purported interview shows up in print. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we'll see the original documents of that. Also, I'm hoping Dan Vogel is in our chat tonight because we're going to be I do see him there, 1830. So we'll be relying heavily on him tonight as well. And so thank you for that, Dan. I'm going to put up on the screen the slideshow. By the way, that shows how easy misstatements do occur. So we'll parse out what's going on here. So this is the thumbnail, interview with Joseph Smith's father. This is the original document that it showed up in, Historical Magazine Notes and Queries, Antiquities, History, and Biography of America, Volume 7, second series.
I have a subscription.
Do you really?
Yes, I do.
Henry Dawson, 1870. So that is the year that this interview was publicized. And this was the opening little paragraph for that section. It says there, I think maybe chapter 11 in this magazine, The Mormons, interview with the father of Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet, 40 years ago. So yes, 1830. Thank you, Dan, for that correction. His account of the finding of the sacred plates by Fayette Lapham, Lapham Esquire. I think it was in the year 1830. I heard that some ancient records had been discovered that would throw some new.
Are we supposed to? Hang on, I'm so sorry, Bill. Have I been supposed to be advancing the slides here?
No. I apologize.
No?
I've got my second. No, you're good right where you're at.
Okay.
I've got a second monitor up, and this happens to me often where I'm looking on my monitor and I've got the right slide. And so thank you for helping us catch up. Historical Magazine on the left. There's the cover. Here's that opening paragraph. Again, it looks like chapter 11 in this book, or section 11 in this book, by Fayette Lapham. I think it was in the year 1830. I heard that some ancient records had been discovered that would throw some new light upon the subject of religion. Being deeply interested in the matter, I concluded to go to the place and learn for myself. That's how it starts off. This is the second page, third page of that interview, fourth page, and then the final fifth page. We're going to go through all of that tonight, but we're going to go through it using Dan Vogel's early Mormon documents. By the way, this is like, and I think, Dan, if I'm not mistaken, it's 5 volumes. And I've got all of them on my bookshelf. They're not cheap, but they are crucial if you want to have the sources and the conversation around the sources from early Mormonism. And Dan has done a beautiful job. I'll put this one, and I'm sorry, RFN. There's page 2 and 3. There's page 4 and 5. This is on the left, Early Mormon Documents, Volume 1. I think that's where this conversation is had. It's a 5-volume series, if I'm not mistaken. And again, they're not inexpensive, but they are so worthwhile. Just in the last maybe 2 years on our show here, I've referred to these books 10 times probably for various documents, various insights from Dan Vogel on them. The way we're going to do this tonight is that generally on the slides, the first one's different, but generally on the slides, the left-hand side will be the interview where Lapham is recounting what was said by Joseph Smith Sr. And on the right-hand side will be Dan Vogel's footnotes. And if I'll start with this one, RFM, and if you'll just alternate slides with me, we both have spent a lot of time looking at this. I think I can speak for you here and say we both found this interview really interesting. And there's a lot of points, I think, to make throughout the night. And so with that, here is the very beginning of how Lapham starts this conversation in this magazine. Joseph Smith Sr., interview with Fayette Lapham, 1830. Fayette Lapham, interview with the father of Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet, 40 years ago. His account of the finding of the sacred plates, Historical Magazine, second series, 7 of May, 1870, pages 305 to 309. Fayette Lapham, born 1794, is listed in the, and this is, by the way, this is an editorial note by Dan Vogel. Fayette Lapham, born 1794, is listed in the 1820, 1830, 1840, and 1850 censuses of Perrington, Monroe County, New York.
By which I understand he was in the area.
He's in the area, yes. And I think that'll be crystal clear by the end. In other words, he's close to the action. We both have gotten comments from people as we've posted that this was going to be the episode tonight. I've had people, I think you have too, but I've had people jump in on post about this and say, you know, this is so late. There's no way any of this is true. You should just dismiss it out of hand. Mm. And I think by the end of the night, we'll at least know that that's not really what you can do once you understand the history. So
maybe Dan Vogel can correct me, but I'm having trouble thinking of any authentic document that a historian would simply dismiss completely out of hand. That doesn't sound like good history.
Correct. And
I mean, it means something.
Yes. And I think this one in particular is unique because there are multiple places where what Lapham recounts is corroborated. And we'll try to point that out.
Yes. Even though I think if I recall perusing it closely enough, that Dan Vogel agrees that his recollection of 1830 is off and it probably was 1829.
Yes, which is why I said 1839. You said 1829, trying to correct that. And there's other places where he's off. And I think it's worthy of discussion when that happens, because I think there's good reasons for why that might be. Mm-hmm. And then there are plenty of places where it's corroborated significantly in some places. And I think all of that adds up to this being really interesting. Okay, so
what I end up with, if I can just say my basic impression, is that, it's fascinating because so much of what he remembers, this is 40 years later. I don't know if he's referring to notes or something, but he sure does a much better job of remembering an interview with somebody 40 years earlier than I would under the circumstances. And I say that because so many of the things that he recounts as having heard from Joseph Smith's dad are corroborated by other authentic documents that are not so late and that are probably, on the whole, you would think they would be more accurate. But he lines up with so many of those, but he gets other things wrong, which makes sense to me that a person would get wrong, like thinking 1830 when it's probably 1829, or thinking that Alvin Smith died between the second and third visit of Moroni instead of the first and the second.
Yes. And those are just some of the reasons why I think this is such a cool moment in church history that we can look at and sort of weigh the events of Mormonism based on what Lapham recounts that Joseph Smith Sr. said. And so we
can I say one other thing?
Please.
When I read this, and as you hear us read it, what I detect is no sign. There is no indication to me of any bias in this account of what it is that Joseph Smith Sr. told them. All right. There's no sarcasm. There's nothing to indicate one way or the other how these people feel. And this is a hard thing to do if a person has animus about something. We've even seen lawsuits filed in federal court against the LDS Church that can't seem to resist making it all personal and venomous about the church, even when it's not relevant to the case that's being prosecuted. So I can see it happen today in situations, and it's easy to detect the animus of the person writing it. I get no whiff of that from this. It's just like this person is just recounting what it was that happened. The only exception is the last line where he says that after the interview was concluded, that he and his companion, I think who was with him, smelled a large mouse.
Yes, I love that line, by the way, at the end. And Dan is just noting, and this is what we want to point out. It is a reminiscence, and it is 40 years late. So it's subject to faulty memory. I also think there are these moments in church history that can easily be confused with other data points. And you pointed out some earlier, Alvin, in the first and second visits of Moroni versus the second and third.
Who among us hasn't made that mistake from time to time?
Especially since one of the visits of Moroni from 1823 to 1827 goes completely uncovered entirely.
Yeah.
I'll just note too, you'll see these as we get through this, and here we are, we're 11 minutes in, we haven't even started yet, but
I know the reason why it goes uncovered, and Dan will support me in this, I'm sure. The reason why it goes uncovered is because Joseph Smith was not able to come up with any more reasons as to how he cocked it up and wasn't able to take the plates home.
Yes. And the reasons in various accounts differ by Joseph Smith, right? Like in some instances, he just wasn't permitted to have them. In other instances, he's struck down 2 or 3 times.
And we've got a new instance, I think, that I hadn't heard that's in this story.
Yeah.
Having to do with putting the article on in a, was it a pillowcase or something?
Yeah. And
you put it on the ground, man. You got to put it in the sack that you brought.
Yeah. Handkerchief or something like that. And then, but my point is that there's these other moments that are, I think it's easy to make them confusing. And I'll just say one of them, and we'll get to it here in a minute, which is, does Joseph Smith get his first seer stone because he borrows Sally Chase's green seer stone, which some sources point to? Or does he borrow Luman Walter's seer stone? And that's how he locates his first seer stone. And other sources point to that.
Mm-hmm.
And you're left with like, okay, Lapham's misremembered. Well, maybe, or maybe Joseph Smith told a couple versions of the story, or Joseph Smith Sr. told a couple versions of the story. And maybe there wasn't a lot of consistency. And if someone is making things up over a long period of time and constantly shifting narratives, it also holds true that they might be shifting narratives. So
what I see as the important part is that in either story, Joseph Smith gets a rock.
And he borrows someone else's seer stone to claim that he's seeing his own. All right, let's jump into it. So in 1850, he's listed as a 56-year-old farmer. That's Lapham. He may have been related to Artis Lapham of Palmyra. And that's also U.S. Census records. That Lapham frequently visited Palmyra is demonstrated by a number of entries in Gain C. Robinson's daybook for 1827 and 1828. So we know Lapham is in Palmyra. He does have familiarity with the characters. He does know characters, meaning the very people involved in the early history of the church. He has run-ins with them because he's in Palmyra quite a bit. And so there's a bunch of notes about all the times that it's recorded that Lapham is in Palmyra. And then below that, although Lapham did not report his interview with Joseph Smith Sr. until 40 years after the event, and Dan thinks the same thing we're saying, many of the details are supported by contemporary sources, some of which remain unpublished in 1870. In other words, they are completely distinct and separate from Lapham, and he wouldn't have had access to them to get those data points from.
I feel like we're doing Book of Abraham apologetics all of a sudden.
Maybe a little bit. All right. So, yet some of Lapham's statements are inaccurate. Yep. And we agree with that too, Dan. He thought his interview occurred in 1830, but Dale Morgan was inclined to date it a year earlier. By the way, when Dan pointed that out on my Facebook post about us covering this and talking about this, I noted to Dan that somebody telling you an interview happened in a certain year, 40 years later, and being off by a year, not really a big mistake. That seems within the reason of what all of us could do easily.
Well, and he says it in such a way as to say that he's not certain. It was around.
Yep. We'll see that in the very first paragraph on the next page. Yep. Okay. Let's see here. Perhaps because it fails to mention publication. This is the reason Dale Morgan thought it was a year earlier. Perhaps because it fails to mention publication of the Book of Mormon or the founding of the church, which would be important data points for Lapham to point out, unless it happens before those two things occurred, in which Lapham would then just not know to say those because they hadn't happened yet. Lapham also alludes to Joseph Jr.'s revelation of late May 1829, D&C 10, which directed him not to retranslate the lost opening portion of the Book of Mormon. So we do know a moment that it definitely comes after. It does signal sort of a line in the sand of what we know, that this would have had to have come after that. And then other things that aren't mentioned would mean it had to have come before that, probably, because those are important moments that would be weird not to note. And so it sort of draws a boundary around when this interview would have been given, and we can sort of guess it at kind of an exact moment in which this happened. Let's see here. Translate the opening portion of the Book of Mormon, and possibly to the revelation of late June 1829, D&C 18, that 12 special disciples should be chosen. That, by the way, that was one of the most interesting things about this interview, and we'll get to that later too, about the quorum of the 12. Nevertheless, Lapham's interview took place before Joseph Sr.'s arrest in early October 30 and subsequent removal to Waterloo, New York. Because Smith's arrested and he moves, he had to have gotten the interview before that happened. So again, we have a pretty good timeline of when this would have occurred. And there's enough things corroborated that this interview almost certainly happened. This is not made up. All right, RFM, I'll turn this one over to you, and we'll just alternate each one.
Okay. Let me put us down here below. In a minute, I will. I think it was in the year 1830, discontinuing Lapham recounting what he says happened. I think it was in the year 1830, so I think it was. I heard that some ancient records had been discovered that would throw some new light upon the subject of religion. Being deeply interested in the matter, I concluded to go to the place and learn for myself the truth of the matter. Okay. So he lives in the area. He's in New York during the time period. And by the way, this is why it was so important that Dan Vogel did all that work to establish his location, and that he actually was in the area. He's not somebody from Missouri or Texas or someplace that has nothing to do with this area, never would have run across Joseph Smith Sr. in his entire lifetime coming up with this reminiscence. All right. So it doesn't mean that it necessarily happened, right? But it establishes that he was in the area. So it could have happened. The location element is met. So it's in the year 1830. Okay. Accompanied by a friend, Jacob Ramsdell. So he goes with his friend to find out what's going on, because he's hearing about all this gold plate stuff. I set out to find the Smith family, then residing some 3 or 4 miles south of the village of Palmyra, Wayne County, New York, and near the line of the town of Manchester. Joseph Jr., afterwards so well known, not being at home. This is why he ends up talking to the dad, because he came to talk to Joseph Smith Jr., but he's not there. But the dad is, and he's willing to talk. So Joseph Smith Jr. not being at home, we applied to his father for the information we wanted. This Joseph Smith Sr., we soon learned from his own lips, was a firm believer in witchcraft and other supernatural things, and had brought up his family in the same belief. Now, did you want to go over to footnote 2 at this point, Bill?
I'll leave it up to you. When I get to the slides I read, I'm probably going to read the whole thing and then go over the footnotes afterward.
Okay, very good. I will follow suit then. He also believed that there was a vast amount of money buried somewhere in the country, that it would someday be found, that he himself had spent both time and money searching for it with divining rods, but had not succeeded in finding any, though sure that he eventually would. And here's the footnote over here, footnote 2, where it shows the corroboration of these items, such as he knows that Joseph Smith Sr. used the divining rod. Okay, that seems pretty particular. Most Mormons don't know that. He knows this. How does he know it? Well, maybe because he actually knew Joseph Smith Sr. and had this discussion with him. In reply to our question concerning the ancient records that had been found, he remarked that they had suffered a great deal of persecution on account of them, that many had been there for that purpose. I'm guessing that's to persecute them, that many had been there for that purpose and had made evil reports of them. Yes. Intimating that perhaps we had come for a like purpose. But becoming satisfied of our good intentions and that we only sought correct information, he gave us the following history as near as I can repeat his words. His son Joseph, whom he called the illiterate. So Joseph Smith Sr. calling his son the illiterate. When about 14 years of age, happened to be where a man was looking into a dark stone and telling people therefrom where to dig for money and other things, period. Now that's remarkable because as a good Mormon, I expect something different at the end of that sentence when it starts with when about 14 years of age and what Joseph Smith does. He's supposed to be going to all these different religions and churches and trying to figure out which church is true and stumbling on James 1:5 and going into the grove and having the first vision. And I don't know, maybe he was doing all those things too, but apparently this is what is recalled that he was doing as well when he was 14. He happened to be in a place or at a location where a man was looking into a dark stone and telling people therefrom where to dig for money and other things. And the footnote over there says a number of sources claim Joseph Smith began money digging in the spring of 1820. Okay, mind blown. So in 1832, when Joseph Smith is harking back to come up with the first vision narrative, he goes back to the spring of 1820 when he was 14. Is that a coincidence? I'll leave it with a question. Do you have anything you want to say about that?
It is strange. It's also strange, and again, there's confusion here because the reason I'm hesitating is because the next footnote. When I started digging into Mormonism, I read D. Michael Quinn's book, Early Mormonism in the World Magic View. I might be saying the title sort of wrong, but that's the gist of it. And there's this conversation there about the documents, and Quinn does a great job of presenting them. And the story that I sort of grabbed onto was that in 1819, 1 year before the first vision, because this is what some documents hint to or say, is that Joseph meets with Sally Chase, Willard Chase's sister. She is also a town scryer. She's also a treasure digger of sorts. She helps people find lost items with her green glass like stone. And Joseph goes to her and says, "Hey, can I borrow your stone?" And she gives it to him. And I got a little image in the top there of Sally Chase holding the green stone to her eye. That's supposed to be a rendition of Lumen Walters to the right. There is no depictions of Sally Chase or Lumen Walters in history. And I forget the name of the book, but I think it's called The Glass Looker. It's the author of the animated sort of comic book style. And
I prefer graphic novel nowadays.
Graphic novel, thank you. So in the graphic novel, he depicts Sally Chase a certain way. He depicts Lumen Walters a certain way, but they're animated. And so then I took those images and I asked ChatGPT if it would make them a little more lifelike. And so that's the images that you're seeing up above to the right of Lumen Walters. So that's a modern rendition with no clue of what Lumen Walters look like. But I'll note that the story I got was this 1819, he borrows Sally Chase's green stone. He looks in the green stone and then he sees that his seer stone, the one made for him, is 150 miles away. That's how but then I learned, by the way, and I think it's in this interview, but I learned that it's not only 150 miles away, it's 150 miles to the west near Lake Erie. I thought that was interesting. especially since I lived in Sandusky, Ohio, right on the shores of Lake Erie. And so there's this confusion about it being either Luman Walters or Sally Chase in 1890, or what did they say here?
1819, I know, but you know, I thought that somebody had thought that this had happened at the end of 1819 or toward the end of 1819, and he might have gotten it and started getting in the swing of treasure digging with it by 1820 in the spring.
Yeah. And so there is this confusion about who it is he borrows the stone from, and that leading to his finding his first seer stone 150 miles away. And people go like, well, that tells you it's not true. That's nonsense. The fact that in both accounts, Joseph is borrowing someone else's seer stone, and in both accounts, he has to go some distance to find his stone that's, you know, buried under a tree. It speaks volumes about, regardless of whether it's Sally or Luman, this is the story that Joseph and his family told about how he got his seer stone. And back to your original point, 1819, 1820 sure is interesting that 1 year before the first vision or the same year as the first vision, Joseph Smith is being initiated into the folk magic treasure digging stuff that he got involved with. And then if we fast forward, how he got his second seer stone with Willard Chase is proposed to have happened in 1822, 1 year before he meets with Moroni. And so in these founding events of Mormonism, right alongside, tied at the hip, are these treasure digging folk magic experiences. And as you point out, coincidence sure is strange. Both narratives involve treasures buried in hills, involve the use of seer stones, involve guardian spirits that are protecting those treasures. Sure is strange.
Right. And all I'm asking is Joseph Smith harking back? Is he an individual who is just a complete con? Or is he a person who is a hybrid and believes some things and believes he's had spiritual experiences? And in crafting his first vision account, did he hark back to what he remembered as being his first significant spiritual experience, however he defines that? And is that why he goes back to the spring of 1820? It's just a question. And I think that it goes to the last two words, Joseph requested, and then it's going to continue that on the next page. Is that right, Bill?
Yeah, so I'll pick that up. So Joseph requested, and I'll flip this here and flip mine on my end. And by the way, before we get to that, Joseph requested, we'll finish that sentence. But again, both Lucy Mack Smith said that Joseph couldn't read and write. And you've got Joseph Smith Sr. here saying that Joseph is an illiterate.
Illiterate. It's like Joseph the illiterate.
Yeah, which is a great little nickname to get, huh? And then I'll just note that this is 1829, and the top and the bottom is a scribe, but the middle, which is a little bit different handwriting and a little heavier, that's Joseph Smith, 1829. Also, this is the original, that's the original manuscript of the Book of Mormon. This is 1832. This is that letter book. And this is Frederick G. Williams and Joseph Smith alternating off and on. I don't know which one's Joseph Smith's handwriting and which one's Frederick G. Williams, but I'll just say that both of them look like competent handwriting.
Yeah.
And so you and I talked about this maybe a month ago in another episode, this idea that Joseph was illiterate, couldn't read and write, isn't substantiated by the earliest writing we have of Joseph Smith, which is contemporary to the dictation, translation, and publication of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. Well, it's 1832. I mean, it's a couple years later. He could have, gone to get some adult education, I suppose. But I know that there's an 1830 letter as well that he dictated, but here's the handwriting. You're right about that. It's a pity, though, that there are some apologists, and one of them is, I forget his name. His name used to be Pehoran on the message boards. And he came over into my Facebook page when you had put up the fact that we were going to be covering this subject tonight. It was quite rude.
Was it like Russ McGregor?
What? Oh yeah, Russell McGregor. I was kidding about not remembering his name, but
Oh, I got you.
yeah. Anyway, so he's a madman, really. He speaks nothing but madman.
So you've got two examples of Smith's handwriting, 1829. So before the publication of the Book of Mormon, 1832, a couple of years after.
Yes, and what I'm saying about Russell
Yeah.
is not just to bring him up for no reason, but to say that it was a complete waste of time, and you know how ridiculous we are for spending any time on this 1870 article because it's so late, it's completely worthless. And I was going to remark that it's a pity he's already discarded it because I bet he would really like to hang some weight on that illiterate remark.
Yeah. And Vogel's pointing out, by the way, that Joe Smith Sr. is a teacher. Maybe he's just creating a comparison. So here's that comment, Joseph Sr. probably comparing Junior to himself. So, you know, I'm a good handwriter. I'm a good reader, also an alcoholic. And the rest of the kids didn't do too bad. But that Junior kid, he's an illiterate. So, but not quite illiterate, at least not by the time the Book of Mormon's being dictated. Okay. So now I wanted to show a couple other little images that I thought are really interesting. Luman Walter's grave, and it just has Walter. It's not plural, but you'll see the Wikipedia page down there. This is proposed to be Luman Walter's grave, and it also has the exact same death date that Wikipedia has for Luman Walters. So Luman Walters died June 2nd, 1860. This L. Walter also died June 2nd, 1860. I don't remember where this was, but the gravestone's in the right place in terms of the city or town. And so that is almost certainly Luman Walter's gravestone. There's a little close-up image of it. And these were in like, let me take Dan's comment down, but these are in Adobe stock images. So sort of strange. And then I don't think Josiah Stoll gets mentioned tonight, but I do want to at least point out there are a couple of images of Josiah Stoll, again, tied to the 1826 Glasslicker trial. We covered that in detail. If you want to follow that story, go find that episode by the title of the same name. And this is the Josiah Stoll home, which is kind of cool because remember, Smith tells Josiah Stoll what his property looks like without ever having seen it. And Stoll is amazed, and he bears witness of that in the trial as evidence that Joseph Smith is a real seer. Except you and I recognize that all Smith has to do is get into town and say, I'm going to go visit Josiah Stoll. Can somebody tell me what his property looks like so I know it when I find it? And then somebody describes the property, and then he meets up with Stoll before he gets to the home and says, I can tell you what your property looks like. And
yeah, it's got this two-story house. It's really nice. It's white. It's got this crazy red door. It's got a big rock out front with flowers and a plaque on it. It says Josiah Stoll, friend of Joseph Smith.
So there's that. That's kind of cool. All right. Now I'll pick up and I'll read that last part. So Joseph requested the privilege of looking into the stone. Again, Luman Walter's stone, according to Lapham's account, which he did by putting his face into the hat where the stone was. It proved to be not the right stone for him. Luman Walter's stone is not the right stone for him.
So even though Luman Walters can see all sorts of crap in this stone, in the hat, Joseph Smith can't see anything.
And it's not the right stone for him because it belongs to Luman Walters. But that, and you go like, well, he can't take that stone anyway. Well, when he gets the stone digging on the Chase property in 1822, Willard Chase, for the rest of his life, claims that Joseph stole that stone from him. And it's acknowledged that it was discovered on the Chase property, which it's only a rock, but, you know, finders keepers, possession's 9/10 of the law, but
you got to fight over something.
You do. It proved to not be the right stone for him, but he could see where the stone was. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me say that again. But he could see some things, and among them, he saw the stone, his stone, meaning, and where it was, which he could see whatever he wished to see. Smith claims and believes that there is a stone of this quality somewhere for everyone. Now, that should ring to anyone who's a Mormon. That should ring familiar.
Especially if you get into the celestial kingdom.
Yes. Which in and of itself at least in some instances, is referenced as turning into one big giant seer stone.
Well, that's the earth in its glorified and celestial state will become a seer stone into all those who inhabit it.
The place where he saw the stone was not far from their house, and under the pretense of digging a well, they found water and the stone at a depth of 20 or 22 feet. And I'll just say here, this is the details of the egg-shaped stone that we know that stone's a real stone. It exists. It's in the church's possession. It's been publicized with images in the church magazines and acknowledged at this point by the church starting in, I think, 2015. But this is the Willard Chase seer stone found on the Chase property while Willard and Joseph are digging a well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's some confusion here about which event leads to which stone being found in which place. But there's enough of these stories being told in other places that we can at least have confidence that Lapham is really being told a version of these events. He just happens to remember one version among 2 or 3 versions of the story.
Yeah. The other thing I want to underscore is that when I'm saying all this crazy stuff with Bill about everybody who goes to the celestial kingdom, in other words, all the good Mormons who go to heaven, get a white stone. They get their own seer stone. And by looking into them, they can see things pertaining to a higher kingdom. And by looking into the earth, which itself will become a huge seer stone, or Urim and Thummim to all those who inhabit it, they can look down into it as they stand on it, I guess, and see all things pertaining to lower kingdoms. That may sound crazy, but this isn't something I'm saying. It's not something Bill's saying. It's not even something that Joseph Smith said. This is in the scriptures. This is canon. This is authoritative Mormon doctrine, and you'll find it in section 129, I think it is. No, is it 129? It's 130 or 131 is what it is, of the Doctrine and Covenants. As strange as what I've told you, that is in there. That is how firmly entrenched this early 19th century American folk magic is in Mormonism still today.
And you could say, well, maybe he's taking some Mormon theological point and he's conflating it with this early church history. But there are plenty of quotes, Brigham Young being one of them, who said that Joseph Smith said that there was a seer stone for everyone. And so this was a common teaching of the prophet Joseph Smith about treasure digging and about everybody having their own seer stone, and then later gets put into some piece of theology where everyone gets a stone as well.
Yeah, there's a stone for everyone, says Joseph Smith, except for you, Hiram Page.
Yeah, because yours seems to work in contradiction to mine, so no soup for you. All right, let me see if I can pick up here. The place where he saw the stone was not far from their house, and under the pretense of digging a well, again, this is connected to the Willard Chase story, they found water and the stone in the depth of 20 to 22 feet. By the way, the 20 to 22 feet is the same as mentioned in other accounts. After this, Joseph spent about 2 years looking into this stone, telling fortunes, where to find lost things, and where to dig money and other hidden treasures. Lapham on
the telling fortunes is interesting to me. I'm sorry, I thought you were continuing to read. You were going to make a comment.
Go ahead and say your thought first, then I can jump in.
I was just going to say that the telling fortunes is interesting to me. It makes sense that one would do that with the seer stone, but I don't seem to recall hearing Joseph Smith being described as telling fortunes with them.
Yeah. And again, Lapham seems to be mixing up the Willard Chase story with the first seer stone. He does acknowledge that Smith used this first seer stone for about 2 years. That makes sense because if he gets his first seer stone in 1819 or 1820, and then he finds the egg-shaped stone in 1822, we know that he's using the stone far beyond this time period. We know he's using it in treasure digging in 1826 because of the Josiah Stoll stories. And then we also know that he's using it later on in church history when he's receiving certain revelations early on. So this would be post 1830. And so it makes sense here the first stone, the white translucent stone that he gets 150 miles away, that he uses for 2 years. Also interesting that that's a white translucent stone, and the rock that everybody gets in Mormon theology is a white translucent stone. So again, we're not even dipping our toe yet into this interview, and we're already finding tons of interesting stuff. Okay. About this time, he became concerned as to his future state of existence and was baptized, becoming thus a member of the Baptist Church. First time I had heard this, I knew he had a close relationship with the Methodist Church, that he was on the rolls of like the Sunday school or something in Methodism. There's dispute about whether he actually joined or not. We'll get to the footnote here in a second on the Baptist Church, but here he is expressing interest in some other religion. And for a kid who's been told by God they're all wrong and corrupt, it is a strange thing that he's still looking for a church anyway.
Well, he didn't see Jesus in the spring of 1820. He saw Luman Walters. Boom, baby. That's the first vision. That's the first vision.
Yeah. And I think, again, we all have to wrestle with it. As a believer, if you're a believing Mormon, you're listening to this, you want the narrative to go a certain way. So your brain is going to tell you that anything that doesn't fit your narrative, you've got to dismiss it, get rid of it, throw it out, make some reason up that you discard it. But I would just say, sit with the early history of the church, wrestle with all the corroborated sources that speak of these same events, and at least try to be reasonable and rational about how you reconcile all of this early history with these accounts that your church never told you about. Okay, so
that would be my word. That would be my top issue. Is how come I have to learn about this from these guys at Mormonism Live instead of Sunday school at church?
Right. Yeah, right. Soon after joining the church, the Baptist Church, he had a very singular dream, but he did not tell his father of his dream until about a year afterwards. He then told his father that in his dream, again, this is Joseph Smith Sr. allegedly telling Lapham, and Lapham's recounting how Joseph Smith Sr. told the story. And so he then told his father, Smith Sr., that in his dream, a very large and tall man appeared to him, dressed in an ancient suit of clothes, and the clothes were bloody. Now, that makes no sense if this is Moroni. This only makes sense if this is a treasure guardian spirit.
Did the 1838 account fail to mention the blood all over his tunic?
By the way, yeah, I'm in my head thinking of like Laban and...
Yes, I was too.
Yes.
I was too. It's the disappearing blood. People say blood is hard to get out, but Joseph Smith has no trouble.
Just a little cold water, RFM. So it says here, a very large, tall man appeared to him. Again, this is supposed to be Moroni, dressed in an ancient suit of clothes, and the clothes were bloody. And the man said to him that there was a valuable treasure buried many years since, and not far from that place. And then it goes on, and we'll get to that in a moment. Footnote number 6. This refers to one of Smith's seer stones, which was found while he and others were digging a well on property owned jointly by Clark Chase and his sons Willard and Mason. Lapham, however, seems to place this event in 1820, while more reliable sources date it to 1822, perhaps in the spring or summer. And Dan's right. There are parts of this story that relate really closely to the Willard Chase egg-shaped brown seer stone used in the translation of the Book of Mormon, found on the Chase property. But I'm okay recognizing that Smith Sr. could very well be conflating two very different stories, and that Lapham only knows the story he's told, and he's being told about the Willard Chase event on the Chase farm digging the well, when Smith Sr. somehow is misunderstanding that the first seer stone is actually involved with either Lumen Walters or Sally Chase in 1819 or 1820, and that Joseph goes far away to find it. Do I think Smith is intentionally misdirecting? I don't have any reason to believe that. And I think all of these accounts, there's so much said in church history where Joseph Smith is telling multiple versions of things that I think it's hard to keep track of.
Well, the reason why I'm especially understanding is after 40 years, especially, my gosh, I cannot tell you how long it took me from hearing the missionary discussions in June of 1978 to getting straight the difference between Moroni's visit to Joseph Smith and the first vision.
Yeah. Also, too, as the story is being told in 1829, which I think is actually the reason what I'm about to say gives me evidence that when he said the thing occurred in 1830, I agree with that gentleman early on who said that in the document that said, in Vogel's notes, that said the interview almost certainly occurred a year earlier in 1829.
Mm-hmm.
Because what Joseph Smith Sr. is saying in 1829 is a treasure digging story. Everything here is treasure digging ways of articulating a narrative. And by the time we get to 1830, Joseph has decided this is a religious narrative. And we'll see other moments in this interview where the story we were told from a religious narrative point of view differs with the way Smith Sr. is telling the story in 1829, because it started off as a treasure digging narrative.
Mm-hmm.
So footnote 6 is
one wonders how Joseph Smith Jr.'s story at this time might have differed from his father's, or if he had been present, if he would have been correcting his father incessantly and saying, shh, no, that's not the way it happened.
Right, because Smith is almost certainly, Jr. is almost certainly telling Senior back in 1820 and 21 and 22, he's telling him parts of this story. If you've told the treasure digging story in years past, you probably just let your father be, because if you go and start correcting him and changing your narrative, now he's going like, wait a minute, that's not the story you originally told me. So you leave Smith Sr. to tell the original treasure digging story.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, well, like, okay, if somebody calls him on it, like, that's Dad, that's not me. There's a separation, so I can maybe get away with it.
This is the original Randy Bott, who was telling the truth about the story that the church teaches, and then got in trouble because the church didn't want that story going public.
Yes, that's a good analogy, by the way. Okay, so footnote 6, Vogel's acknowledging this sounds a lot more like the Willard Chase story, which would have happened in 1822. But that also, again, this Lapham guy knows that this first seer stone was used for about 2 years. That makes sense when we recognize the Willard Chase seer stone is actually a later thing, and that these two stories are being conflated. In footnote 7, Lapham dates this event to 1822. Again, that is the Willard Chase year. However, since the Chase stone was discovered in 1822, not in 1820 as Lapham remembered, and Lapham says Smith used the stone about 2 years, this brings us to 1824. I would push back against Dan and say, I think, again, he's telling the wrong story. He should be telling the Lumen Walters, Sally Chase, 1819, 1820 story, and then the timeline fixes itself, because then in 1822, we get the second stone after it being used for 2 years. Mitchell Bronk, based on the reminiscences of conversations with his grandfather and other Manchester townsmen, said Smith attended the Baptist church during the revivals of the 1820s, perhaps referring to the winter of 1824, 1825. Mitchell Bronk account, while Smith confessed that he attended the various meetings in the neighborhood, possibly including those held at the Baptist church in Manchester, he said he joined none of them. So it's a secondary source that is in part, not strongly, but in part corroborating that Joseph seemed to have had maybe some interest in the Baptist church. Not a strong corroboration, but at least it's there.
Or it could have just mistaken it for Methodist.
And that's possible as well. Okay, footnote 8, he evidently refers to Smith's 1823 angelic visitation, Both Lucy and Joseph report that the senior Smith was told of the angel's visit before the younger Smith made his first visit to the hill. So there's that. And we know, again, Smith has those 3 visits from Moroni at night and in 1823. And then he gets up the next morning and he's really tired. He sort of falls over the fence and his dad comes to check on him. And the church history narrative, the spiritual narrative, is that Smith Jr. then relates to Smith Sr. that he had been visited the night before and that morning by Moroni. And his dad essentially says, you should do what the angel tells you to do.
It is of God.
But again, what Lapham is saying is that this isn't Mormon angel Moroni. This is treasure guardian spirit who's...
This is pre-Moroni.
Yes. And it's backed up, by the way. Footnote 9, Joseph and Heel Lewis reported that Joseph Smith told them that the messenger, again, Moroni, or ghost, had his throat cut from ear to ear and the blood streaming down. So we have a corroborated account that this is not Mormon angel Moroni. This is treasure digger guardian spirit who's a throat slit Spaniard cut from ear to ear and bleeding, whose clothes are all bloody. This isn't the Mormon narrative. This is a treasure digging story. And Joseph Smith Sr. is telling it, and Lapham's recounting of it is corroborated by other documents that suggest that we ought to give some semblance of credibility to what Lapham's saying, that this is the account he got from Smith Sr. Okay, RFM, let me start your sentence. And the man said to him that there was a valuable treasure buried many years since, but and not far from that place, and
that he had now arrived for it to be brought to light for the benefit of the world at large. And if he would strictly follow his directions, the genie said, he would direct him to the place where it was deposited in such a manner that he could obtain it. He then said to him that he would have to get a certain cover lid, which he described, and an old-fashioned suit of clothes of the same color. Do you know what a cover lid is?
I don't, but at least it coordinates to me with the story of needing a chest or a box.
Yes, I think that's what it is. It was a little Mormon chest.
It's a Mormon
cover
narrative.
Lid. I think I'm getting coverlet is what. No, cover lid was it says a bedspread. It is, I think, related to coverlet. What is the meaning of cover lid? A fabric bed covering, essentially a bedspread. Okay, so that's what I'm coming up with.
Let me say,
Google it.
Let me say this to RFM.
Yeah.
It is interesting that Joseph Smith, according to this account, needs to have a sheet to cover the treasure with, and that there are multiple sources that point to the 8 witnesses and the 3 witnesses and others not actually ever seeing plates, but seeing an object that was wrapped in a cloth.
Yes. You know, and it would make sense if you want to sling it over your shoulder to have a bedspread to put it in the middle of and, pull up the other 4 corners. I'm not saying that's what happened, but that's what a cover lid is, apparently, which he described, and an old-fashioned, suit of clothes of the same color. Others describe that as black, at least on the night he went to actually get the plates. This is the first visit. And a napkin to put the treasure in, and go to a certain tree not far distant. This is very interesting. And go to a certain tree not far distant, and when there, he would see other objects that he would take or keep in range and follow until he was directed to stop. So it's like, okay, go to this tree, and then once you're at that tree, look around and see if you're attracted to any other object, then walk to that one, then look around, same thing until you're directed to stop, and X marks the spot. Until I hadn't heard this before. I've heard of it actually in terms of a way to try and not go in circles if you're lost, is to eyeball an object as far out as you possibly can and then follow directly to that object and keep doing the same thing. But not in this way in order to find hidden treasure. There he would find the treasure that he was in pursuit of once he was told to stop. And when he had obtained it, he must not lay it down until he placed it in the napkin. Here's the thing. Okay, the napkin. He's got to place it in the napkin. Don't be putting it down on the ground. Don't be putting it anywhere else. Got to put it on the napkin. And says Smith, in the course of a year, hang on a second, a napkin? Yeah. Until he placed it on the napkin. And says Smith, in the course of a year, I succeeded in finding all the articles as directed. So this is, I'm not quite understanding this, because it's like the angel appears to him, tells him he's got to do this, and then for the next year, he's finding all the articles as directed. Is this also going out into the the forest and following from one point to another? I'm not sure. Is he gathering things? Is he going? Is there some kind of scavenger hunt in which he's engaged? In the course of a year, I succeeded in finding all the articles as directed. And one dark night, Joseph mounted his horse and, aided by some supernatural light, will-o'-the-wisp, he succeeded in finding the starting point and the objects in range. Following these as far as he could with the horse, without being directed to stop, he proceeded on foot, keeping the range in view. If Dan could help us on what that means, keeping the range in view, until he arrived at a large boulder of several tons weight, when he was immediately impressed with the idea that the object of his pursuit was under that rock. This is a bit different than having a vision of the place so clear that he knew where it was immediately.
And again, it's a treasure digging story. So it requires, the guardian spirit has rules and processes. And if you do anything wrong, the treasure slips back into the earth and you can't have it. You have to draw the circle right. You've got to sprinkle dog's blood on it. You have to say the words correctly. Nobody can make a joke or get out of line. And if anybody messes up this entire ritual, then it goes south.
Can I say that even though both of them are supernatural, this one at least seems to be more practical. It makes more sense to me. In other words, that than Joseph Smith saying that he had a vision, he was given a vision of the place, that immediately knew where it was, even though it's just out in the woods on a hill somewhere, right? You think that a place on a hill in the woods would probably look pretty much like any other place on the hill in the woods. But he knows it immediately. I never understood exactly how he could know it so clearly. But this makes sense, even though it's still supernatural, is that you go out there and you sort of go by hunt and peck, or walk to one place and then walk to another, and then you feel that you've got to stop, right? So you're being guided at each step of the way by supernatural forces. At least that seems more practical to me, if those forces exist and are there to help you find things. Following these as far as he could with the horse without being directed, I read that. Being a stout man. Okay, wait a second. Feeling around the edge. Remember this huge stone he comes to? He found that the underside was flat. This is a massive stone now. Being a stout man and aided by some supernatural power, he succeeded in turning the rock upon its edge. Boom. And under it, he found a square block of masonry. That's the first mention of masonry in Mormonism. In the center of which were the articles referred to by the man seen in the dream. Now the articles are in the box, and this is part of the thing that I have trouble understanding. So the articles are in the box, and these are going to end up being the articles that we understand to be in there, including the plates. Taking up the first article, and this is going to be the plates, he saw others below. Laying down the first, I hope he put it in that napkin. I mean, was he listening? Laying down the first article he picked up, laying down the first, he endeavored to secure the others. But before he could get hold of them, the one he had taken up slid back to the place he had taken it from, and to his great surprise and terror, the rock immediately fell back to its former place. He could have gotten crushed. Good thing he didn't have his foot under there, nearly crushing him in its descent. His first thought was that he had not properly secured the rock when it was turned up, and accordingly, he again tried to lift it, but now in vain. He next tried with the aid of levers, but still without success. This is sort of like pulling the sword out of the stone and anvil. You have to have the supernatural power to do it. While thus engaged, he felt something strike him on the breast, which was repeated the third time. So 3 times, always with increased force. The last such as to lay him upon his back. Yeah, that's similar to other accounts given by Joseph Smith Sr., I think. As he lay there, he looked up and saw the same large man that had appeared in his dream, dressed in the same clothes, presumably with the same blood. And here are the footnotes for footnote 10 about the old-fashioned suit of clothes that Joseph Smith was to wear.
Again, Lapham says essentially the same concept as Willard Chase says in another account.
And the Willard Chase account is talking to Joseph Smith Sr. And it's much earlier too, I believe, like 1834.
So it seems like Lapham is talking to Joseph Smith Sr., this interview took place. That's the point. So while Pahoran wants you to just dismiss it out of hand, the context of what's being said matched up with other sources tell us that the last thing in the world we should do is dismiss this out of hand.
Right. So Willard Chase mentioned the requirement for black clothes and a black horse. And I think that was the 1827 visit to the hill, but this is being talked about on the 1823 visit. There's a similar requirement for an old-fashioned suit of clothes of the same color. Oliver Cowdery mentioned in 1835, this is about Joseph Smith getting beat up by Moroni. Oliver Cowdery mentioned in 1835 that Smith had been struck 3 times by a supernatural force. This is Oliver Cowdery is recounting this. He's getting it direct from Joseph Smith. He's writing that those letters, right, that are being published that contain the history of the church, a very early and valuable history of the church. And he says that Joseph Smith had been struck 3 times by a supernatural being. That's 1835, very early. Willard Chase said that Joseph Smith was struck twice, and that's in 1833, or at least circa 11 December 1833 statement, very early. In his 1839 history, this is the history, the official history that we have, in the Pearl of Great Price, Smith made no mention of being struck. See, that's not in the official account. Moroni is much softer and gentler in the official version. And he states simply, I made an attempt to take them out, but was forbidden by the messenger. So I think in the official account by 1838, 1839, it becomes something where Joseph Smith was being tempted by all this gold, and the poor boy from the poor family being tempted by the gold. And that was the reason, because the angel could see him drooling over the gold, said, no, you can't have it. You have to come back and you have to grow up and you have to realize this isn't for you to sell. It's for you to translate.
I'll just add here, the fact that it goes from a story where Smith is struck by a treasure guardian spirit multiple times, and with the last one is knocked to the ground. And then in later accounts, it becomes this spiritual narrative where Moroni is an angel of God. And angels don't, again, other than who wrestled with the angel and grabbed their thigh and put their joint out of place.
I think it'd be Jacob.
Okay, yes, the Jacob's ladder. So outside of that, we don't have a lot of instances of angels fighting people or knocking them down or showing some sort of violence. It reminds me of the seer stone being slowly shifted to Urim and Thummim, so that people would think that the Nephite spectacles were being used because the same terminology is being used. So there's this like bait and switch. And I see in this instance sort of a bait and switch as well, where this is now turned into Moroni, who just forbid Joseph from having the plates, come back in another year. Joseph seems to me, based not on just on this account, but on other things as well, that Joseph is embarrassed by his treasure digging and is trying to make the later religious narrative void of all aspects that connect to the treasure digging story.
If you overlook the fact that this is all happening on the autumnal equinox, and if you avoid all this supernatural stuff, okay, you end up with a story that the church tells, which is obviously missing something. There's a structure there with no meaning, which is, why does Joseph Smith go to the hill in 1823 and not get anything, even though he was supposed to? He fails. And then he's supposed to come back again the next year on the same night, and again in 1825, and again in 1820. Still nothing. And again in 1827. What is going on, Joseph? Why can't you get those plates? The only explanation given in the official history of the church, as far as I recall, has to do with that first one, and he was just a little bit too greedy. He wanted the gold, right? Well, come on. I'm sure he would have gotten over that. And so now we sort of talk about the church makes this up, okay? Because there's a void here. It's a void that is completely answered, or almost completely, by this treasure guardian narrative, because it's all about the details that the hapless treasure hunter violates inadvertently, and he can't get the treasure. So he has to keep going back, and he screws it up some other way, and he has to come back in another year. That completely answers that question. And that's supported by documents. The thing that's not supported by documents, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, is this story, I think, that the church has created to explain why it is that he has to keep coming back, is that he keeps coming back every year. And Moroni is like having some kind of seminar on the hill Cumorah by moonlight for Joseph once a year. And he's teaching him stuff that Joseph Smith needs to know, although we have no idea what it was because they're making this stuff up, right? That he needs to know in some way before he can actually get the plates.
And then the only thing I'll add here is that when you step outside of a believing lens and you look at this as Joseph is a fraud, it becomes quite obvious to me that whatever Joseph's plan is, it's not going together as easy as he would like it to. He intends, he's telling everyone, he's telling his family, he's telling the other treasure diggers, I'm going to go to the hill in 1823 and I'm going to get that treasure. Right. And I'm going to bring it back. And whatever his plan was, it's not coming together. And he has to buy himself another year and another year and another year and another year. It takes him 4 or 5 times longer to put together. And the quick, easy go-to for me is to fabricate something so that it has some heft to it. It sounds like metal clinking against itself, and it has the feel and shape and weight of something that would at least be believable as a metal treasure of plates. That it took him that much longer to build it when he thought it would be an easy task.
If God is involved and this angel is coming from his presence, there should have been no reason for Joseph Smith to have had to go back to this hill at all. He would have gotten the plates in 1823 and translated them by the gift and power of God. God can protect the plates from being sold. He can strike Joseph Smith. He doesn't have to strike him down because he still needs him, but he can strike him blind for a time or whatever it is he needs to do to get the point across. But this incessant delay of 4 years, 23 is when they go, 24, 25, 26, 27. 4 years to do what? Nothing. At least nothing that's explained, except Joseph Smith is getting older And maybe, I don't know, he's working on a storyline in his head.
Also, you can't have it both ways. If it's either gold and Joseph's greedy, or it's tembaga and some other alloy so that it can weigh the right amount. And you can't have it both ways. And then I'll just say too, if you're God and you've called your prophet and he shows up on year 1 and he drops the ball, and he shows up on year 2 and he disappoints you, and he shows up on year 3 and he doesn't get it right, at some point you go, excuse my language, but you go, are you shitting me? Seriously? Get me another guy. Get me someone else. Give me Lumen Walters. Give me Samuel Lawrence. Hell, I'll take Sally Chase. Give me someone who will just do the ritual, not be greedy, show up when they're supposed to, and put the plates in the napkin and take it home. It's so,
and even an earlier story has to do with taking your eyes off the plates, right? You can't take your eyes off the plates, even when you're going for a leak. So he puts the plates down, turns his back on them to put the stone back down, turns around, plates are gone. That's another variation. These are not things that really happen. I'm sorry. That may seem obvious. What I mean by that is, even if the supernatural existed, you don't get told to, I mean, unless you're Cardinellis or something, I don't know. You don't get told by an angel, don't take your eyes off the plates. And the first thing you do is you take your eyes off the plates. That's so you can't get them right. This is a story. It's not relating something that actually happened.
God is pissed at Martin Harris on the first try. He takes the 116 pages home and he loses them, and God has the worst of words for him. But Joseph can F it up 5 years. And God's like, nope, that's my guy. Love him to death. Let's keep going. That makes no sense. If you've selected Joseph Smith as your prophet and you get to year 5 and he still isn't getting shit right, at some point you just have to throw in the towel and go find me another guy.
Well, apparently God was in no hurry to get the restoration up and going.
Yes, he was not in any hurry to do that.
That took 7 years from the first, Moroni showing up. I mean, it took 10 years from God and Jesus showing up. God and Jesus show up, and it takes 10 freaking years to get a church organized. What's up with that?
All right, so here's this. We've gone over the footnotes there, I believe. Yep. Okay. So I'm going to.
Yes, and it says, oh, wait a second.
Yep. I'll just note Brody Award voting is open. If you look at the live chat, it has been placed in the live chat. So you can click that link, go vote for the Brody Awards. I believe next Wednesday on Mormonism Live will be our award show. Notifying everyone in the post-Mormon world who won the Brody Awards. I will also just right now, I'm going into the show notes, and in this episode down below in the synopsis for this episode, you'll see that link as well. And then I'll just note that the last sentence there was, he said to him, so I'll go to the next slide here. He said to him, when the treasure was deposited there, he was sworn to take charge of and to protect that property. This is Moroni, by the way.
This is the being that will become Moroni, at least.
Yes, this is the treasure guardian with blood on his clothes, with his throat slit ear to ear. So he's saying, he said to Moroni said to Joseph, when the treasure was deposited there, he, Moroni, was sworn to take charge of and protect that property until the time should arrive for it to be exhibited to the world of mankind. And in order to prevent his making an improper disclosure, he was murdered and slain on the spot. By the way, that explains the bloody clothes. That explains the throat slit ear to ear. There's no reason to think that this is not an accurate detail that Lapham is remembering from Joseph Smith Sr. He was sworn to take charge of and protect that property to the point where he was murdered or slain on the spot, and the treasure had been under his charge ever since. This is a treasure digging narrative.
It's like being the Maytag repairman. You just got to sit around and watch this piece of land. Nobody comes to it. It's out in the wilderness.
Yeah, what a fun job that was. So Moroni said to him, Joseph Smith Jr., that he had not followed his directions. Again, he didn't follow the treasure digging ritual.
The napkin, I told you.
And in consequence of laying the article down, putting it in the napkin, he could not have the article now. But that if he would come again 1 year from that time, he could then have them. The year passed over before Joseph was aware of it. So time passed by, but he went to the place of deposit where the same man appeared again and said he had not been punctual in following his directions, and in consequence, he could not have the article yet. It's not greed. He messes up the ritual in year 1. He's lazy and forgets about it and shows up late in year 2.
And this is the first time I'm hearing about a time limit, like there's a deadline. Is it midnight? I don't know. But apparently, if you're not in time, you can't get the plates either. There's always a reason. These are the stories. These are like 101 Arabian Nights. And that's why I made the reference to the genie, because they're always going to fool you. You're always going to goof something up. You're never going to get the treasure. And if you do, it will be in such a way as to really screw you over because you didn't understand what it was you were asking for.
Yeah. He had not been punctual in following his directions, and in consequence, he could not have the article yet. Joseph asked when he could have them. And the answer was, come in 1 year from this time and bring your oldest brother, Alvin. He doesn't say Alvin, but he says your oldest brother, but that's Alvin, with you. Then you may have them.
This is where they have Alvin dying between the second and third visit of Moroni instead of the first and the second.
But this is also strange. When it's a treasure digging story, it makes sense that the guardian spirit tells Joseph to bring his living brother, not knowing that brother will die in the meantime.
Yeah, it's just a treasure guardian. It's not like an angel who would know the future.
Right. When it's an angel who would know the future, he shouldn't be asking Joseph to bring Alvin with him because Alvin's going to die.
Yeah. Well, everybody was surprised.
Yeah, that's what happens when you take, was it calomel or something, and you form it into a ball with mercury in it, and you shove it down the gullet of your brother whose appendix burst, and it gets lodged in his gut, and he dies a slow death, which was even worse than if he just died of appendicitis. Yeah, it went from bad to worse. And unfortunately, whoever this treasure guardian is, he didn't see any of it coming. All right.
Just bring Alvin. He'll be okay.
During that year, it so happened.
Oh, by the way, of course, it's never happened. The guardian spirit, first off, he never appeared. But of course, he never said to bring Alvin. You understand that this is another thing. This is another condition that the guardian spirit puts on Joseph Smith that he's not going to be able to fulfill, which means that this was retroactively created. So it could be a story that would fit into that pattern.
When it's a treasure digger story, a year can go by, and when the day comes and you still don't have the plates, you can go to the other people in town. You can go to your dad, who's also a treasure digger, by the way. We covered that earlier. You go to the other treasure diggers and you go, yeah, I couldn't get it again. I was supposed to take Alvin with me. I didn't tell you guys that, but I was supposed to take Alvin with me. And you guys all know, like, Alvin died
almost a year ago.
No. Now, keep in mind,
Alvin passes away in November of 2023, 2 months after the first visit of the being who will become Moroni to Joseph Smith. And that's when he says, you can't have them because you screwed something up, Joseph. But next year, bring your brother with you and you can have him. And so Joseph Smith, I guess, I don't know, he doesn't tell anybody. But the next year he shows up with Moroni, and Moroni says, okay, so where's Alvin? And Joseph Smith says, well, he died last November, 10 months ago. And sorry, you can't have the plates. So now you got to come again next year, but you got to bring somebody else. And Joseph Smith says, well, who am I supposed to bring this time? And the guardian spirit says, I'm not going to tell you, but you'll know him when you see him.
And I will just throw out, I'm actually going to try to put this up on the screen if I can. Yeah, here it is. So I think there's another way this story could unfold, because we do have to deal with this. Take this down, put that up. This is the newspaper where Joseph Smith Sr. talks about it's being circulated that somebody's going to disturb the grave of Alvin. It seems obvious when you understand all the details of the story, at least in part, what's going on here, which is that Joseph Smith Sr. is saying, like, yeah, I've got to take Alvin and he's dead. So I'm going to probably just have to dig him up and cut off his hand, take a part of him with me, which again is a treasure digging allowance. In books like the Magus, which Joseph had access to, were these treasure digging books that explained how rituals were done. There is this allowance that if a person that you're supposed to have living to do something as part of a ritual, if they've died, you can cut off a part of their body and take that with you. And so long as you have Alvin's foot or Alvin's hand, I would prefer those be the two members that we utilize. If you take a hand to the seance, the ritual, the treasure dig, it still is sufficient as if it's Alvin there. As Joseph is telling people, like, Alvin's died, maybe I'll dig up his body. Suddenly everybody's talking in town about Joseph Smith Jr. saying out loud that he's going to dig up his dead brother's body and cut off a part of his body. So then Joseph Smith Sr. puts an article in the newspaper because it's being rumored that his son's body has been disturbed. And it's obvious that if it's disturbed, it's been disturbed by Joseph Smith Jr. So he puts an article out that says this method is taken for the purpose of satisfying the minds of those who may have heard the report and of informing those who have put it into circulation. The report by Joseph Smith Jr., by the way, and those who have put it into circulation, everybody that he told, that it is earnestly requested they would desist therefrom, and that it is believed by some that they have been stimulated more by a desire to injure the reputation of certain persons, aka Joseph Smith Jr., than a philanthropy for the peace and welfare of myself and friends. Joseph Smith, Palmyra, September 25th, 1824.
Bill?
Yes.
There is a paragraph above that. If you scroll down in that same story, there it is.
Yeah. Whereas reports have been, let me see if I can make this bigger. Whereas reports have been industriously put in circulation that my son Alvin had been removed from the place of his internment and dissected, which reports every person possessed of human sensibility must know are peculiarly calculated to harrow up the mind of a parent and deeply wound the feelings of relations. Why relations? Because it's Joseph Smith Jr. If my son is dug up and my other son is saying he was going to do that, you're hurting the relationship between me and my son. Therefore, for the purpose of ascertaining the truth of such reports, I, with some of my neighbors this morning, repaired to the grave and removing the earth, found the body which had not been disturbed, because Joseph Smith Jr., of course, wasn't actually going to dig up his brother and cut off his hand. He just needed the narrative to go along with how he was supposed to fulfill the plates and wasn't able to. In other words, I think at some point you're right, RFM. The time has passed. He doesn't have the plates. And he starts telling people like, yeah, because Alvin died and I was supposed to take him with me. And so, I tried to take a part of his body, and suddenly everybody's like, he dug up his brother. He cut off his hand. And next thing you know, Joseph Smith Sr. is like, what the hell is being said here? I'm going to get some friends, go dig up the body and just make sure it's not been disturbed.
Now, this does appear to have been signed the same day as they went to the grave. It says this morning in the first paragraph. Did you see that?
Yeah, therefore, I with some neighbors this morning, and
Yeah.
it's dated September 25th, 1824. So the day after, is that right? There's September
4 days
21st.
later.
Yeah,
This
okay.
is 4 days later,
September
isn't
21st.
it? At
Yeah.
least 3.
Yep, September 21st.
Okay.
Mhm. 3
So
days, 4 days later.
now they're going out to the grave. They're not going before the meeting with the treasure spirit on the equinox. They're going several days later to the grave.
So it makes sense what you're saying, RFM, because this sounds like a man who immediately dealt with it. So Joseph Smith is spreading the rumor not too long before September 25th.
I think he's doing it after.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, I think he's doing it after he was supposed to go up there and get the plates, and he couldn't do it because he didn't have, the Alvin with him. And so what's he going to have to do? Is he going to have to bring a piece of him? Dan says it seems people knew about the requirement to bring Alvin to the hill in 1824. Yep. Okay. No, I'm not sure because I guess that could be either way. But it would have to be beforehand that now he's saying, oh, I'm going to go up there, but I don't have Alvin with me. And he said I have to bring Alvin. I guess I'll have to bring a piece of him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, one friend told 2 friends and they told 2 friends. And pretty soon people are talking about how Joseph Smith is going to dig up the grave and take his brother's hand up the hills to satisfy the guardian spirit and get the plates.
Again, this is not a Moroni story. God doesn't require a person that he knows is going to be dead in less than a year to go with the guy to get the plates, and that if he doesn't get them, he's allowed to dig up the body and cut off a part of that person and take it and still get the treasure. This is a treasure digging narrative. All right, let me pick up here. And just what you said, he could not have the treasure yet, but there would be another person appointed to come with him in 1 year from that time when he could have it. Joseph asked, how shall I know the person? And he was told that the person would be known to him at sight. During that year, Joseph went to the town of Harmony in the state of Pennsylvania at the request of some who wanted the assistance of his divining rod. Again, this is Josiah Stoll. And stone in finding hidden treasure. Supposed, and again, we'll continue that in a moment. Footnote 12, this seems to follow money digging lore and lore about protective spirits. Exactly what we're saying. Dan Vogel is acknowledging that this is a treasure digger story. This is similar, for example, to Jonathan Thompson's 1826 account of Smith on a money digging excursion in Bainbridge and Colesville, New York area. According to Thompson, Smith said he saw in his stone 2 Indians who buried the trunk, that a quarrel ensued between them, and that one of the said Indians was killed by the other and thrown into the hole beside the trunk to guard it as he supposed. Here are 2 accounts separated by geography that seem to indicate Lapham could have had no awareness of this other account. And yet both Lapham and this Thompson, Jonathan Thompson, are both saying that Smith told us a story. Joseph Smith Sr. told me, Joseph Smith Jr. told us a story of this being an Indian treasure dig narrative with one Indian killing the other Indian. The other one has a murdered person as well. Both instances, the murdered person is responsible to guard the treasure. There's zero reason to doubt that Lapham, at least in part, is telling us enough of a truth of what he was told that we should clearly be looking for explanations of why this is not Moroni and this is not Mormon. This is not a Mormon narrative.
Yeah, this last part about those 2 Indians, as he puts it, one of them killing the other, the dead one becoming the guardian spirit. This is 1826. This looks like it's part of his testimony at the Bainbridge trial.
Yep. Footnote 13, the instruction to bring Alvin on his next visit to the hill is corroborated in a number of sources. We have numerous sources pointing to the fact that Joseph Smith does tell lots of people that he is supposed to bring Alvin to the hill. Again, no reason to distrust Lapham. He's only saying what's been said before.
And why does an angel from God, whatever his name is, require that you have to bring somebody with you for you to get the plates when you're capable of carrying them off yourself? And when ultimately you will be allowed to carry them off yourself. Even though Emma had to go with him at least as far as the carriage would go on the road.
This account will only mention Alvin and then it's Emma, as you pointed out, but there are other sources, and we'll get to that here on the next page. There are other sources that point to it also, that in between those two is there's a short moment where Joseph tells people that it's Samuel Lawrence that he's supposed to take with him. And then quickly, because Lawrence loses his loyalty or something, Joseph no longer trusts that that's the person he's supposed to take, or no longer trust having him involved in this narrative, that he quickly moves on to Emma being the person.
Or he just falls for Emma.
But it points to the fact that this isn't a Moroni story, because Moroni keeps shifting from one person to the next, as if he has no clue how history is going to unfold at all. If you don't have a clue how history is going to unfold, then you don't have a clue how history is going to unfold, and you can't bet on anything.
You know, an angel like that a God like that wouldn't even know that if you allowed somebody to take 116 pages with them for their family to look at, that it would end up getting lost.
Right. And if you didn't understand the future, if you understood the future that poorly, you're not going to trust a guy to keep messing it up until he gets to the 5th year and then go like, oh yeah, I feel good about this. Go ahead and take the plates now.
By the way, we are so, as a species, at least those of us with religious inclinations, so invested in defending God whenever anything bad happens, that in the story of the lost 116 pages, we will blame Martin Harris. We will blame his wife. We will blame Joseph Smith if push comes to shove. But we never blame the guy who's obviously responsible, and that's God, who said, okay.
Yeah.
Well, Joseph Smith asked him 3 times, so he should have said no 3 times. Duh.
Yeah. And by the way, how many times would you ask God if you could do something and him say no?
Once. That's also part of the story.
Yeah, that's all it would take. Okay. Let me finish. Let me start your sentence.
It's like Moroni appearing 3 times during the night.
Yep. Yes. During that year, Joseph went to the town of Harmony in the state of Pennsylvania at the request of some who wanted the assistance of his divining rod and stone in finding hidden treasures supposed. This is where you start at the top here.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I had lost track of where you were. I was actually looking in here trying to find out where you were reading, but you weren't. No. You're on the previous slide. I've screwed up the whole continuity.
That's okay. I'll just he goes to Harmony, state of Pennsylvania, and at the request of someone who wanted the assistance of his divining rod, again, Josiah Stoll, and his stone in finding treasures. I
just wanted to hear you say that someone wanted the assistance of Joseph Smith's divining rod.
Yeah, well,
it's supposed to have been deposited there by the Indians or others. Can I look at it? Hang on a second here. Let me just look at this. Joseph went to the town of Harmony in the state of Pennsylvania at the request of some who wanted the assistance of his divining rod. Right. This is, like you said, Josiah Stoll. And in finding hidden treasure supposed to have been deposited there by the Indians or others, Captain Kidd, pirates. While there, he fell in company with a young woman, and when he first saw her, he was satisfied that she was the person appointed to go with him to get the treasure he had so often failed to secure. To ensure success, he courted and married her. Well, there's no way she can get away from going with him to the hill now. When his work was ended at Harmony, he returned with her to his father's in Wayne County. And at the expiration of the year, he procured a horse and light wagon with a small chest and a pillowcase and proceeded punctually this time with his wife to find the hidden treasure. When they had gone as far as they could with the wagon, Joseph took the pillowcase and started for the rock. Upon passing a fence, now this is interesting. Upon passing a fence, a host of devils began to screech and to scream and made all sorts of hideous yells for the purpose of terrifying him and preventing the attainment of his object. Had you ever heard that before?
I have never heard about a host of devils trying to stop Smith from getting to the plates.
By yelling at him.
Yeah.
What is this new devilry? But Joseph was courageous. But Joseph was, maybe there's a little bit of snark in that, I'm not sure. But Joseph was courageous and pursued his way in spite of them all. Arriving at the stone, he again lifted it with the aid of superhuman power, as at first, and secured the first or uppermost article, this time putting it carefully into the pillowcase. See, he may not be a fast learner, but he gets it eventually. Before laying it down, he now attempted to secure the remainder, but just then the same old man appeared and said to him that the time had not yet arrived for their exhibition to the world. Keep your hands off that sword of Laban. But that when the proper time came, he should have them. I guess that proper time never came. And exhibit them with the one he had now secured. That's the plates, by the way. So these plates, according to this interview, which is probably 1829, 1830, relates Joseph Smith Sr. as saying that his son told him about the angel telling him, the treasure guarding telling him that he would be able to display the plates and display the other articles that were contained in this masonry box underneath this huge stone. That hasn't happened yet. So he now attempted to secure the remainder. Okay, old man appeared, said to him, time had not yet arrived for their exhibition to the world, but that when the proper time came, he should have them and exhibit them with the one he had now secured. Until that time arrived, no one must, let's probably look at him, but let's see. Footnote 16, several sources state that Smith was instructed to bring Emma Hale to the hill. Yeah, that's part of the official narrative even.
But just a note, again, Lapham has an accurate point that's corroborated by multiple sources.
Oh, thank you. Yes. However, Willard Chase and Lorenzo Saunders state that Smith was first instructed to bring Samuel F. Lawrence, then his wife.
And by the way, it makes perfect sense that Lawrence is, first off, just such a short moment in time where he's the guy Joseph's supposed to bring. And it doesn't serve any purpose for Joseph Smith Sr., if he even knows that, to relate it to Lapham, because it's just a detail that gets in the way. It makes much more sense for him to move from Alvin, which is already a disappointment, and you got to figure out why this guardian spirit didn't know Alvin was going to die. And he move on to the correct person that it actually is successful with. To have another failure in between is just going to cast doubt. It makes perfect sense to not tell that part of the story.
On the part of Joseph Smith's dad.
Yep.
The other part of the footnote on 21 says, while Lapham, the person relating this here, remembered a tall old man, Abner Cole said Joseph Sr. described the messenger as a little old man with a long beard. So there's another discrepancy.
It seems most likely that it is a tall old man, that at least the narrative, how it goes. And we'll see that later when they talk about the characters of the Book of Mormon. And this happens in other places. For instance, Zelph, who is this really tall person. And so we have multiple touch points where it's being talked about that the people of the Book of Mormon were extremely tall versus extremely short. So I'm more likely to believe Lapham's account than Abner Cole's, who, by the way, if for folks who just aren't that familiar with Mormon history, Abner Cole went by the name of Obadiah Dogberry when he was breaking into the Grandin print office, copying down sections of the Book of Mormon and printing them in the newspaper so that people could read it before it was actually published.
Yes. So here at the end, now this leads into the next slide. Okay, you ready? We'll see if I can be a little more smooth on this one.
Okay.
He now attempted to secure the remainder, but just then the same old man appeared and said to him that the time had not yet arrived for their exhibition to the world, but that when the proper time came, he should have them and exhibit them with the one he had now secured. Until that time arrived, no one must
be allowed to touch the one he had in his possession, the plates, for if they did, they would be knocked down by some superhuman power.
Boy, this guy, he's pretty rough.
Yeah. Joseph ascertained that the remaining articles were a gold hilt and chain. And I don't know exactly what that means, but at least the way it's described here, we'll get to it in a second. The way it's described here is that the sword is deteriorated and all you have is the hilt of the sword. I understand that word, but I don't know what the chain means. Do you know what that means?
I don't know. It could either be ornamental or a means of securing it to the body, waist, or shoulders. By the way, this idea about getting knocked down by some superhuman power upon touching the plates without authority or authorization, does that sound like what happened to Laman and Lemuel when they went to go touch Nephi to put the hurt on him? It says they were shaken.
Yeah, I think it's at least interesting and noteworthy. Joseph ascertained that the remaining articles were a gold hilt and chain and a gold ball with 2 pointers, again, the Liahona. The hilt and chain had once been part of a sword of unusual size, but the blade had rusted away and become useless. By the way, I'm going to throw a bone to the church, to its apologist. One of the things the apologists argue is that the reason we don't find anything in Central South America is because it's so much moisture. The ground is such that anything that was metal would have deteriorated and rust away. It's why we don't find anything. And at least here we have a piece of corroboratory evidence that says that, yeah, Joseph even is telling you that the sword got rusted away. Now, I will say there are other places in church history, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to take that comment down, Jan. But yes, the Cole did his paper at the exact same press as the Book of Mormon.
It's hard for a sword to be unsheathed if there's no blade at all.
Yes. And there are other parts in church history where Joseph talks about the sword in such a way, and others recount seeing the sword or in vision or whatever, that the sword is in good shape. It's not rusted away and deteriorated.
Doesn't Brigham Young, was it Brigham Young who gave the account or ascribing to someone else of the hill Cumorah opening up and the guys walking in and they see all the plates and then there's a table, and isn't there a sign? The sword of Laban is there and it's unsheathed, right? I thought there was a sign, or is there a voice that says that this sword shall not be sheathed until, Jesus comes again and makes everybody Mormon, something like that?
You're not sheathing a sword with no blade anyway, huh?
Right. That's do I have that right? Okay. You go, I'll see if I can find that story.
Okay.
This is just that little detail about the sword of Laban in the story. I think we've all heard the story.
Got it. And so, Alexa behind me is talking. So Alexa, stop. All right. So Vogel says matches stories of rusted swords that were found in the mounds. So just a note there. Okay. Joseph then turned the rock back, took the article in the pillowcase, and returned to the wagon. The devils, with more hideous yells than before, followed him to the fence. As he was getting over the fence, one of the devils struck him with a blow on his side, where a black and blue spot remained for 3 or 4 days. By the way,
and that proves it.
Black and blue spots, I think, last a little longer than 3 or 4 days, just FYI. But Joseph persevered and brought the article safely home. By the way, there's nothing stopping Joseph, in order to keep this story having that detail, from hitting his chest with a rock or running and like landing up against something on purpose.
Defense.
Yeah.
See, I fall into the fence on the way home in the dark and I get bruised, and that's where the demons hit me. And Dad goes, wow, that's proof.
Yeah. So
By
just
the way, Brigham Young, Journal of Discourses, June 17th, 1877, tells that story.
please.
And very quickly, I'll just get to the part where it says, the first time they went there, the sword of Laban hung upon the wall. But when they went again, it had been taken down and laid upon the table across the gold plates. It was unsheathed, and on it was written these words. So it was on the sword itself. On the blade, perhaps. This sword will never be sheathed again until the kingdoms of this world become the kingdom of our God and his Christ. And Brigham says he heard it from Oliver Cowdery and others.
Yeah. So what do we do with that? A sword that's rusted away and there is no blade to a sword that's intact. Hence, it will be sheathed at some future point.
And it would be interesting to hear people argue which is correct when actually I think there probably never was a sword at all.
That seems like the most rational, logical point of view. All right. But Joseph persevered and brought the article safely home. I weighed it, said Joseph Smith Sr., and it weighed 30 pounds.
Horan, you need this. Don't discard this. You need the 30 pounds. You need the Joseph the illiterate.
I don't even think Tumbaga we can get down to 30 pounds, can we?
Well, we can when he gives this unusual dimension. Two of the dimensions are standard, and one is very unusual, the depth of the plates or the thickness.
In answer to our question as to what it was that Joseph had thus obtained, he said it consisted of a set of gold plates. Golden color, I guess.
And for some reason, yes, gold plates, good point. For some reason, the way this is being related, or the way that Joseph Smith Sr. was saying it, is we finally find out what the first article is that there's been all this discussion about beforehand. So in other words, he just keeps talking about article this and article that, and there was other articles, and he picked up this article, and then he did that with this article. And finally we said, so what the hell's the article? And he says, oh, it's the gold plates.
In answer to our question as to what it was, what is that article that Joseph had thus obtained, he said it consisted of a set of plates about 6 inches wide and 9 or 10 inches long. They were in the form of a book, half an inch thick.
Just half an inch thick. Now that could be 30 pounds.
By the way, there comes a point where Joseph has something bigger, but 2/3 of that is a sealed portion, which is encapsulated.
Yeah.
One wonders if it took him so long, 4 or 5 years, to fabricate a half-inch thick set of plates and still wanting it to be more substantial to be convincing to people.
That's when he put it on the rock.
Took a piece of log or something, encapsulated it in some sort of wax.
Yes.
Adds his little half-inch stack to the top.
And then puts the big old napkin around it and only exposes the top part.
And then says, here you go, everybody.
Here's the place. Nope. No touching.
That makes a lot of sense. Because whatever Joseph Smith Sr. saw originally, he says it was only a half-inch thick and weighed 30 pounds.
At least according to this late recollection.
Yes. Which we've corroborated at multiple points to show that there's at least truth in a whole bunch of other areas.
And also noted that there are discrepancies.
Yes, but discrepancies that make a lot of sense to me, and I think you, about why they're there. Being off a year, for instance.
Well, the dimensions of gold plates and the weight. I have no idea how he remembers all this after 40 years.
Pretty freaking good, huh?
Did he write this down? It's just amazing to me. Maybe people had better memories back then. Maybe I've got a crappy memory today.
It is more of a storytelling culture. Again, we live in an age of all of this technology, which does all this for us. But if we go back in time, earlier societies, earlier peoples used storytelling as the way to convey information and pass it down. And so these cultures before, the technology we have today, recording devices, these cultures would have been much more apt at storytelling, at remembering stories, at knowing that these things have to be remembered in certain orders. So I do give credit to some degree that really is the nature of this culture.
Can you imagine what these guys, including Lapham, are thinking? If they're going there thinking that they're going to find out about a new religion and a restoration. I'm not sure exactly what it was that had reached them, but they were interested enough to go travel to find out what was going on, try and talk to Joseph Smith Jr. about it, interested enough to do that, talk to his old man, and just sit there and go, what on earth? What on earth are you talking about? The only thing worse than that is finding out about it 40 years after you got baptized.
Happened to a lot of us, RFM. It happened to a lot of us.
These guys got off easy.
All right. So the 1/2 inch thick, it was not bound at the back like our books, but were held together by several gold rings in such a way that the plates could be opened similar to a book. Mm-hmm. Under the first plate or lid, he found a pair of spectacles. Under the first plate or lid, it's almost like the plates are like an empty box. He opens the first plate and there's a cavity because he calls it a lid. A lid covers a cavity. And he says inside there is the spectacles. That's a strange thing.
Mm-hmm.
Again, years late telling, who knows? But that's strange.
It's going to get stranger.
Yeah, well, okay. He found a pair of spectacles about 1.5 inches longer than those used at present day. Now, again,
so not hugely big, just a little big.
And we do get other accounts. I think William Smith and Charles Anton both point to this idea, but that the spectacles were too large for Joseph's face.
Right, and that whole breastplate thing especially.
Yeah. He found a pair of spectacles about 1.5 inches longer than those used at present day. The eyes not of glass, but of diamond.
Of diamond, of course.
Gold and diamonds.
So much better than glass.
Silver and quartz. Gold. Silver and gold.
Oh, that's so nice.
On the next,
Burl Ives used to sing up here, used to live up here, not far from where I am right now. Of course, he since passed away. He used to live in Anacortes, Washington for a number of years. I think he retired there.
Nice. On the next page were representations of all the Masonic implements as used by Masons at the present day. Again,
wait a second. Wait, what?
The second plate. So the first plate was a lid. Underneath that, some sort of cavity. Then there's the glasses inside there, the spectacles. Mm-hmm. Then you get to the second plate, and it's got a bunch of Masonic implements. Remember, too, Alvin and Joseph Sr. were Masons. The Smith family closely associated with the Masons, and Joseph gets involved later on in Nauvoo and utilizes heavily that to create his temple endowment.
So it's got at a minimum, it's got a compass and a square on a plate. On one of these gold plates that Joseph Smith has, there's Masonic symbols.
Again, this is a treasure digger story, not a religious narrative. The remaining pages were closely written over, and then we'll get to that in a minute. Footnote 22. Again, anybody wants to read all the ones that we don't have highlighted, you can pause the show and read those. But footnote 23 from Dan Vogel, Benjamin Saunders said that on Smith's return from the hill, someone tried to get the plates away from him. He said he knocked the man down and got away, had 2 or 3 skirmishes on the way. And if we remember right, he gets back to the Smith home. He's got a jammed finger. And he talks about how people attempted to stop him and that he had to fight them off and he got injured on the way. And so the early account is a treasure digger story with evil spirits. And the later account is a religious narrative where there's opposition, human opposition that's trying to thwart and get the plates from him. So there's that. And then footnote 26, Lapham is apparently unique in this claim since many others connected the Book of Mormon with anti-Masonry. So when we talk about criticisms of the Book of Mormon, it's talking about the issues of Joseph Smith's day, and some of those views are anti-Masonic is the argument. But what Lapham is saying is that there's some pro-Masonic stuff on the plates. I'm just checking my notes too to make sure I covered everything here. Yep, we've talked about all of those. So I'll read.
And Lucy Mack Smith had mentioned diamond in relation to the Urim and Thummim as well. So that's another correspondence between Lapham and other documents.
Interesting. All right, I'm going to read this sentence. The remaining pages were closely written over. That's me setting you up for this page.
Oh, in characters of some unknown tongue. Thank you. So the last containing the alphabet of this unknown language. So not the title page.
By the way, none of this is the story of the Book of Mormon. It's all like preface pages of things.
Yeah. The last containing the alphabet of this unknown language, because that's what you put on plates, is the alphabet of the language you're using. It's like Voyager. Joseph, not being able to read the characters, made a copy of some of them, which he showed to some of the most learned men of the vicinity. Now, here he talks about Joseph doing it when Martin Harris is what we understand, or who we understand, went to New York, which he showed to some of the most learned men of the vicinity. All the clue he could obtain was from George Crane, who said he had seen a pass, capital P-A-S-S, which I'm not sure I understand what that is, but apparently it's something that has writing on it. Who said he had seen a pass that had been given to Luther Bradish when traveling through the Turkish dominions, and he thought the characters resembled those of that pass. Accordingly, Joseph went to Franklin County and saw Mr. Bradish, who could not read the strange characters, but advised him to return home and go into other business. But Joseph was not willing to give up the matter without further trial, and from Franklin County he went to New York City, where the most learned men, or man, then in the city told him that, with few exceptions, the characters were Arabic, not Hebrew, not Egyptian, not even Reformed Egyptian, Arabic. And that is one of the languages that occurs in the recounting of the story in the official history, and you can find it in the Pearl of Great Price, except, of course, it's Martin Harris going to see Samuel Mitchell and then Charles Anton. Thank you. With few exceptions, the characters were Arabic, but not enough to make anything out. Returning home, he one day tried the spectacles and found that by looking through them, he could see everything. Past, present, and future, and could also read and understand the characters written on the plates.
But he couldn't see that his bank was going to fail.
No, there's only certain corners that you get to see around. These are usually the unimportant corners that don't matter, that you can see around. Also note that he has Joseph Smith understanding how to interpret after the visit to New York. So in his story, there would only be the characters and not the characters in the translation along with it. Before proceeding to translate the characters, Joseph was directed to choose 12 apostles. That's interesting, and a really interesting correlation, because most members of the church don't know about the command to select apostles very early on, which may have been acted on, but history doesn't record them or pay as much attention to who they might be as it does the 1835 12 apostles, when the three witnesses are told, go pick 12 apostles, and those become the first apostles in church history. We just ignore the ones that existed several years before that. I guess that idea kind of got discontinued or ignored or petered out, and Joseph wanted to revive it in 1835 or something, this idea about apostles. But regardless, there are different sets depending upon the time. Joseph was directed to choose 12 apostles who must be men who believed in the supernatural. That's a handy prerequisite for an apostle. He would not err in choosing them, as he would know the proper person as soon as he saw them. See, there's a lot of that going on. You know the right person when you see him. You know the right tree when you see it. You know the right place where you got to stop. One was to be, and we'll continue that later. Footnote 28 says, despite Lapham's assertion that Smith approached Bradish, it was likely Martin Harris who visited him in Albany in February 1828. Yeah, it was Martin Harris, probably, not Joseph Smith, doing this. Footnote 29, while Bradish resided in Franklin County, Martin Harris probably met him in Albany, where he was serving in the state assembly. William W. Phelps said that Harris visited Utica, Albany, and New York City, seeking learned opinion regarding the Book of Mormon characters. And finally, footnote 31, in June 1829, Joseph Smith dictated a revelation, section 18, directing Oliver Cowdery. This is about the apostles, okay? And this is in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 18, June 1829, that early, directing Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer to search out the 12. Although there may have been 12 apostles. I'm sorry, go ahead.
By the way, 8 witnesses plus 3 witnesses plus Joseph Smith.
12.
Yeah, okay.
I remember the time I realized that. I thought it was a big deal. I thought, well, there's 12. And the guy I'm talking to says, yeah, welcome to the party. In June, okay, so there's the revelation. And there may have been 12 apostles as early as 1831. And although that's the case, they did not form a distinct quorum within the ecclesiastical structure like they did later on, starting in 1835. A quorum of 12 apostles was organized in 1835 when Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, and David Whitmer ordained them. So this is like this early, somewhat shadowy prehistory where we have the Melchizedek priesthood being restored by the voice of God in 1830, I think it was, June of 1830 or 31. And then later on, we have a different story about Peter, James, and John showing up. Yes. And I'm sorry, I was saying yes to Dan Vogel's comment, which was put up on the screen, and I think we'd covered that already. So I can't remember what I was going to say, and I blame Dan for it. But Bill, did you want to go on?
Yeah, and I've got yep. So let me just say this too, though. Just so it's crystal.
What I was going to say was I was going to liken that. I'm sorry, the restoration of the Melchizedek priesthood and the prehistory story, and then the structured official narrative story, which are different. And one is earlier, and this one I think is earlier about the creation of apostles and the choosing of apostles. And then that's all sort of nebulous, and we don't have a lot of details, but we know it happened because it's in the Doctrine and Covenants. And we have a little bit of documentation that you found, Bill, in these next slides that talks about at least one of those apostles.
Yeah, and Dan, you can help me out. This reminds me of a different moment in church history where prior to Peter, James, and John being alleged to have come down and given the Melchizedek priesthood, Joseph has somebody ordain him to the office of elder or high priest. I don't remember which. I think it's high priest because elder is a name they get at the founding of the church in 1830, the first elders of the church. But there's another person who's just an early run-of-the-mill kind of leader in the church who ordains Joseph to be a high priest. We have a record of this. And it's before the alleged visit of Peter, James, and John to give the Melchizedek priesthood. It reminds me sort of this story. And so just to be crystal clear with what you're saying here on the slide is that in 1829, the 3 witnesses are told in a revelation that they'll be able to search out and select the quorum of the 12.
I think 2 of them.
2 of them. Okay, but all 3 end up ordaining in 1835. But okay, so 2 of them are in 1829 instructed that they will search out and call the quorum of the 12. And in a believing, faithful, whitewashed narrative of the church, we believe that happened in 1835, that there's a 6-year space in between the revelation to call the 12 and them actually doing it. And what some evidence, it's limited, but what some evidence indicates is that there actually is another quorum of the 12 that's selected shortly after this D&C 18 revelation was received. And there's no talk anywhere in the church about this. And in fact, you can see that the church and its apologists don't even want to talk about this, because in the next slide, this is one of the sources, and I found 2 of them. This is one of the sources. This is Eber D. Howe, Philasterus Hurlbut, Mormonism Unveiled. And it says, for which Ziba, and this is Ziba Peterson, and Ziba is not one of the 12 in 1835, for which Ziba was deprived of his elder and apostleship. Let that which was bestowed upon Ziba be taken from him, and let him stand as a member in the church, and let him labor with his own hands with the brethren. And thus by commandment, poor Ziba, one of the 12 apostles, is thrust down, while Oliver the scribe, also an apostle, who had been guilty of similar conduct, is set on high to prepare work for the press, and no commandment touches him, only to exalt him higher. And, again, this is Mormonism Unveiled. It's Eber D. Howe, Philastrius Hurlbut collecting affidavits. Maybe they're just making it up. They're anti-Mormon. Maybe that's true. Then the second source is a newspaper that is contemporary, Tuesday, December 6th, 1831. This is a newspaper when it is happening. This isn't going around and collecting stories and publishing them later. This is in the moment that that's occurring. And it says, while descending the Missouri River, Peter and Frederick, two of my company, divulged a secret respecting Oliver, which placed his conduct on parallel with Ziba's.
This is what they're quoting in Mormonism Unveiled.
For which Ziba was deprived of his elder and apostleship. Let that which was bestowed upon Ziba be taken from him, and let him stand as a member of the church, and let him labor with his own hands with the brethren. And thus by commandment, poor Ziba, one of the 12 apostles, is thrust down, while Oliver the scribe, also an apostle. So yes, it's a duplicate of the story, but this is the original source, and it's contemporary to the moment it's happening. Ziba, one of the 12 apostles, is thrust down, while Oliver the scribe, also an apostle, who had been guilty of similar conduct, is set on high to prepare work for the press, and no commandment touches him, only to exalt him higher. I'll just say, too, the Painesville Telegraph does a pretty good job of reporting on Mormonism during this time. And there are lots of newspaper articles where they're passing along the history and the events as they're happening. So that's that. There's that source. Okay, now, so it is interesting. My point being, what I was trying to say was that when you now go into looking up, you can go into Google, a search engine, type in Ziba Peterson Mormon, and you'll get a bunch of faithful websites that are covering him as an early character in the church, and not a single one uses the word apostle in any of their stuff. At the very least, it seems like there should be an acknowledgement that this isn't true, but it is referenced to, just to be accurate about history. But they avoid it at all costs. Why? I don't know, but they don't want to address it at all. Okay, now,
well, apostle does end up being the highest office in the priesthood in the LDS Church, and I think it sounds more impressive if it just shows up in 1835. One might wonder why God waited that long, but he did. And to have it showing up earlier and not really going anywhere, it just seems unseemly.
It does make more sense that there was an earlier 12 apostles, and that there was not much time passing between the revelation and when those witnesses went out and found them and called them.
Yeah, and maybe they found all 12, and maybe they just found a few, and they kept looking, and you don't find apostles everywhere, and large amounts don't grow on trees.
And maybe there weren't that many people that they could be confident believed in the supernatural the way they needed.
Yeah, so they could have had 4 or 5 or 6 or 12.
Yeah. I'll just note here, Braden Sorensen is asking, why is Jesus known as Jehovah and Adam known as Michael before they lived on earth, yet Peter, James, and John don't have different names? But wait, there's more. James was only named James to appease King James. Yeah, I don't know any of that. And to be honest, Braden, it doesn't have to do with tonight. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on that. But if you can
look at the nice super chat.
I do.
James is Jacob, of course, in the New Testament in the Greek. It's Peter, Jacob, and James, Peter, Jacob, and John, which I learned when I went to Japan and had to learn about Petro, Jakobu, to Yohane. So even when we're teaching it in Japanese, it's Yakubu, it's Jacob.
He does.
You're right. In English, it's James. Yes.
I don't think he's actually. Maybe you're asking an actual question, but it seems like you're just pointing out that it doesn't really mesh when you look at it from different directions. And so I do appreciate it. $19.99. Thank you. Again, not trying to be rude. I often don't want to get sidetracked because we're already going to go long tonight. Already are going long. Okay, this slide here. It started off in that previous one. One was to be a scribe.
One of those 12 apostles was to be a scribe.
Yeah.
These early ones. After much opposition, Joseph succeeded in finding the required number of believers, requisite number, among them Martin Harris, who was chosen scribe. After having made these necessary arrangements, Joseph was directed not to make the translation where there was so much opposition. Hence, after procuring the necessary materials, he and Martin went to Harmony in Pennsylvania, where they would be less persecuted, and where Joseph, with spectacles on, translated the characters on the gold plates, and Harris recorded the result. So he's got Martin Harris as a scribe for the apostles, continuing to function as a scribe for the translation of the Book of Mormon. Oh, I'm sorry, we're not doing paragraph by paragraph. After thus translating a number of plates, Harris wanted to return to Palmyra, taking a part of the writings with him. 116 pages, anyone?
Can I stop you for just a second? So Dan is pointing out, let me see if I can find it again. John Whitmer's elder's license says he was an apostle in 1830.
There's another one.
I just want to put it up here.
I wonder if they're all the same witnesses.
So there's the license for John Whitmer.
Except Ziba wasn't one of the witnesses. I don't think.
Given to John Whitmer, signifying and proving that he is an apostle of Jesus Christ and an elder of this Church of Christ, established and regularly organized 1830, 6th day of April.
There's some overlap between the 12 apostles, the original, and the 12 witnesses.
And it says here, he was ordained under the hand of Joseph Smith Jr., who is an apostle of our Lord. So
ain't nobody being an apostle unless Joseph Smith can be one too.
So you've got Ziba, Cowdery, Joseph Smith Jr., and John Whitmer all being referenced to on some level as being apostles. And
Martin Harris, did you say him?
Yes, but yes, an apostle and a scribe. And
is that 5?
Yep. Yeah, and all of those are the people we said that equal 12, except Ziba, who's a bit of an outsider to that. But I will say that the elder's license is much more credible to me as evidence than the Painesville Telegraph or Mormonism Unveiled, and seems to indicate strongly that there was a quorum of the 12 prior to what the LDS Church considers its first quorum of the 12.
The shadow government.
All right. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Oh, I'm still reading. He wanted to return to Palmyra. Oh, yeah, the 116 pages. He's not going to mention the number. The Lord objected for fear that Harris would show them to unbelievers who would make sport and derision of them. God is very thin-skinned in Mormonism. But Harris finally obtained leave to take them. He wrung from God his slow leave on condition that he should let no one see them except those who believed in them. In this he was indiscreet and showed them to someone that he ought not to. When he next went to his drawer to get them, behold, they were not there. The Lord had taken them away in this version. They were not there, but this says the Lord took them away as opposed to somebody other than the Lord took them away. If the Lord had taken them away, it wouldn't have been the big problem that it ended up being for Joseph Smith. Joseph and Harris, I was pausing there in case you wanted to say anything, Bill.
Sorry, I'm in my head trying to figure out another connection here to that footnote 35, which is the, again, anyway, I'm off track. I'll explain this here in a moment, but I'll let you finish. I'm sorry.
Does it involve a gold watch?
It does. Yes. That's.
Yeah, I thought maybe. This is so weird that me and Bill, this is like a mind reading act now. We've been together so long.
Yeah.
They're gone, right? But this one says that the Lord had taken those pages away of the manuscript.
And I'll just say that is so. Thank you. That tells me where you're at. It's interesting that on the front end of the conversation, Joseph is so afraid that they're going to turn back up, and he knows that he can't reproduce them exactly. And then on the back end in 1830, time. I'm saying this incorrectly, but we have a second story here where Joseph is saying the angel took them back. The angel taking them back, I don't know, it just doesn't match Joseph Smith's description of why they were taken and what the fear was and what was going on. It feels to me like there's two different accounts of the story being told. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what I see in this most readily is what the difference in memory that happens over 40 years, much less time for me. But this idea that you remember that there were pages, there were manuscript, and they ended up disappearing. Okay, why did they disappear? Now the mind substitutes, creates the answer to that. It has to have an answer. And his mind, meaning Lapham's mind, okay, God did it because, of course, the angel's going to take the plates away too. So it's a natural conclusion to go to. And then he builds the rest of it around this. Maybe. That's just a possibility. And then he says, Joseph and Harris returned to Harmony and found the plates missing. See? The Lord had taken them also. Then Joseph put on the spectacles. And this is really interesting, especially in light of the section in the Doctrine and Covenants where Joseph Smith remote views a parchment manuscript that's buried somewhere in the Holy Land on the other side of the planet, and he reads it in his log cabin in New York State. But here's what happens. He doesn't have the plates. What will he do? Well, Joseph put on the spectacles and saw where the Lord had laid the plates among the rocks in the mountains. Though not allowed to get them, he could, by the help of the spectacles, read them where they were, as well as if they were before him. Isn't that great? What a great detail to the story. And although it's different than, of course, the other documents on that and conflicts with them, we can see other places where it corresponds to what Joseph Smith claimed he could do. And indeed, we wonder, why did Joseph Smith have to have the plates with him on the table if he was going to look into his hat at a stone to see the characters on the plates and their translation? They could have been just as well left in the hill. And this account says that they were. They were directed. Now, here's the other thing. This also ends up corroborating the Mosiah First Priority theory of Brent Metcalf, because this explicitly states that they were directed by the angel or by God. Don't start again at the beginning of the story. Start where you left off and keep going from there. And I believe this story ends up getting to the end of it, and they don't have a beginning. They never come around and translate 1st and 2nd Nephi, etc. But let's see if that's where it goes. They were directed not to retranslate the part already gone over, for fear the new work would not correspond in every particular with the old. Their enemies might take advantage. Now, here is an interesting thing, because can we read the rest of the sentence on the next page and then get back to that footnote, Bill? Enemies might take advantage of that circumstance and condemn the whole. Well, how would they know if it's God who took the manuscript pages that were lost? See, that's my point. Is this just, if you go back and listen to our episode, folks, on the 116 lost pages, RFM and I have a really important conversation there where when you look at the 116 pages story as an outsider who doesn't believe that Joseph Smith did what he claimed, it becomes really clear that Joseph is just trying to cover his ass here. That he's worried that whoever has those pages, if they turn back up, if those people hold on to them, and Smith in the meantime goes, well, I'll just retranslate this. He understands clearly that whatever I produce,
it will not correspond with what is being held. And then when I produce it, they're going to show up with those 116 pages and prove that I'm a fraud. And none of that makes any sense if Moroni took, as you point out, if Moroni took the plates away and has given them back. That because now you can just reproduce it. And even if you don't reproduce it, those pages are gone, or at least you're saying you put on the interpreters and you know where they're at and the angel took them back. Like none of that makes any sense. And what Lapham's saying corresponds heavily with the way the narrative unfolds. And you would see that if you watched that episode on the lost 116 pages that RFM and I did about a year ago.
Okay. So thank you for letting me go into the next slide. Did you want to comment on this footnote 35?
Yeah. So when I read in the interview that Joseph had gotten physical, I thought that's interesting because it's not the first time. And it's that Flora Woodworth episode where Joseph Smith gives Flora Woodworth, who's 17 years old, gives her a gold watch. He's trying to procure her as a plural wife. She's just a kid. And he gave some of his plural wives gold watches. Emma catches on that Flora's got Joseph Smith's gold watch.
That was so that they would know when to expect him.
Yeah. So Emma raises hell, and Joseph, there's a quote from William Clayton in his journal that I think it's journal, maybe some other place, but William Clayton records that Joseph, and I don't remember the wording, I was trying to find it, but that Joseph got rough with Emma, had to really put her in her place in a way that was, even William Clayton's like, ooh, that was extreme.
Harsh measures?
Yes, yes. And it indicates, at least what seems like a really reasonable indication, is that Joseph got physical and committed some sort of physical punishment on Emma.
Well, Emma just wouldn't shut up about that gold watch and giving it to Flora Woodworth, which she found when she was over visiting.
So I thought in this moment, like, oh, that's the same kind of thing. Here's Joseph being physical again. And I just want to, again, give credit when it doesn't work in my favor. Footnote 35, it's rumored that Joseph whipped his wife for being concerned in this transaction. But Lapham is confusing this with the accusation of Lucy Harris that Martin Harris had hit her with the butt end of a whip. And so Joseph comes out of this. Lapham is inaccurate. He's conflating a different story where Martin Harris is whipping his wife, not where Joseph is doing that. And so Joseph gets off the hook here. Okay, next one. Nothing here stood out to me. I'll read it really quickly. And so in the previous thing, it said they were directed not to retranslate the part already gone over for fear the new work would not correspond in every particular with the old. Their enemies might take advantage. Again, this makes no sense if Moroni took it away and brought it back. And if Moroni's located the pages and told Joseph where they are through the interpreters. But that their enemies might take advantage of that circumstance and condemn the whole.
I think what he's doing is he's recollecting the missing 116 pages, so he doesn't mention the number of pages, and he's conflating that with the sealed portion because he has him not retranslating the 116 pages section, but on the small plates of Nephi, right? But I don't think he mentions anything about this, the 2/3 that's sealed.
But they could begin where they left off and translate until they were directed to stop. For in consequence of their indiscretion, they would not be allowed to translate the whole. So the sealed portion only becomes sealed when they break the rules, when they don't keep the commandments, when they don't follow the expectations and guidelines that were given to them. At some future time, they would be allowed to translate the whole, and then their translation, the gold plates, the gold hilt, the ball, the pointers, could all be circulated together. By the way, Mormonism has said essentially that is some future day now that will probably never come, right? Because because it's not real.
It's going to happen right after Jesus comes. In fact, Jesus is bringing this gold hilt, no blade, because it's all been wrested away. He's going to bring the hilt and the liahona with him when he comes.
The gold hilt, the ball, the ball and pointers could all be circulated together, each a witness of the others. In answer to our question as to the subject of the translation, he said it was a record of a certain number of Jews who at the time crossing the Red Sea left the main.
Now, this is interesting because he puts the Nephite migration in Mosaic times. In other words, in the time of Moses, instead of 600 BCE.
And they went away by themselves, finally became a rich and prosperous nation, and in the course of time became so wicked that the Lord determined to destroy them from off the face of the earth. But there was one virtuous man among them, whom the Lord warned in a dream to take his family and depart, obviously Lehi, which he accordingly did. And after traveling 3 days, he remembered that he had left some papers.
I love this part.
Yeah.
The papers. I left some papers at the office. By the way, there is a prominent mention of the Red Sea in the departure of Lehi from Jerusalem, as you know. And in recollection, a person could think of the Red Sea and immediately connect it with Moses, and then this change in the narrative can naturally occur. But the the papers at the office, that's a new one.
Yeah, so which is obviously the brass plates, but left some papers at the office where he had been an officer at the office, which he thought,
where you usually find officers,
which he thought would be of use to him in his journeyings. He sent his son back to the city to get them. By the way, if you haven't read the Book of Mormon and you're trying, someone told you the story one time and you're trying to tell it 40 years later, he has enough of the details right to know that he had a conversation with someone about the Book of Mormon. But he also gets them wrong enough to know that he's not spent a lot of time talking about the Book of Mormon in his life.
And Joseph Smith Sr. wouldn't have spent a lot of time talking about the Book of Mormon because it had just been dictated.
Yes. He sent his son back to the city to get them, Nephi. And when his son arrived in the city, it was night, and he found the citizens had been having a great feast and were all drunk. And when he went to the office to get his father's papers, he was told that the chief clerk was not in and that he must find him before he could have the papers. He then went into the street in search of him.
It's a typical bureaucracy.
But everybody being drunk, he could get but little information of his whereabouts. But after searching a long time, he found him, Laban, lying in the street, dead drunk, clothed
it's a typical bureaucracy.
Clothed in his official habiliments. His sword had, what's that?
Habiliments? His uniform?
His habiliments, okay.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, that's the word. His sword having a gold hilt and chain, lying by his side, and this is the same that was found with the gold plates. Finding that he could do nothing with him in that situation, he drew the sword, cut off the officer's head, cast off his own outer garments, and assuming those of the officer, which
I like this. I forgot my papers. I go back to the office. They're not here. The chief clerk isn't here. I go out and try and find the chief clerk. Everybody's at a party. It's like Mardi Gras in Jerusalem. Everybody's drunk. I find the chief clerk. He's dead drunk. I can't do anything with him, so I cut his head off. How often have we wanted to do that to a bureaucrat?
Cast off his own outer garments and assuming those of the officer, returned to the office where the papers were readily obtained, with which he returned to where his father was waiting for him. The family then moved on for several days when they were directed to stop and get materials to make brass plates upon which to keep a record of their journey.
Now that he screwed up the story of the brass plates and misremembered them as papers, he knows there's brass plates involved, so he has to come up with a way for the brass plates to appear. So then he creates this, I think, in his recollection.
Which is a crossover of Nephi needing to build gold plates, which, by the way, folks, how does a small little band of people ore metals and make plates? Okay, I'll just leave that hanging there.
I was doing that just the other day, Bill. It's not that hard. People think it's hard. It's not.
Yeah, the billows and all that, getting the heat hot enough and getting the metal out of the ground. Yeah, no big deal.
The great ones make it look easy.
All right, let's see here. Also to erect a tabernacle wherein they could go and inquire whenever they became bewildered or at a loss of what to do.
Oh, by the way, can I just jump in here and make this longer? Thank you. Please. Go ahead. No, seriously though, now we're entering into the place that Don Bradley loves to go to, because he wants to, in his theory, in which he tries to reconstruct some of the contents of the 116 missing pages. He wrote a book about it. This is one of the places he goes to because it talks about a tabernacle. And so he wants to immediately gravitate toward temple motifs and a seer stone and a skin of an animal. Although what I see going on here is more akin to taking a stone among the Nephites, the ancient inhabitants. They don't have top hats back then. So they took a skin and put the stone in the skin so it would perform the same function of allowing them to look at the stone in the darkness created by the skin in which the stone is contained. So it's basically just giving an ancient version of what Joseph Smith was doing with the hat and the stone, I think. Now I interrupted you. Do you remember where you were?
Exactly where I was. After all things were ready, they started on their journey in earnest. A gold ball went before them, having 2 pointers, one pointing steadily.
Is it really going before them? Like the star before the wise men?
Well, I just think you're all holding it out in front of you and it's directing you where to go. Wherever.
Well, why are you thinking that? Why are you thinking that's what it's talking about? It looks like
maybe
it's going before them.
It just hovered like that ball that Luke Skywalker was trying to hit us with his sword.
Right. Absolutely. We call it a lightsaber.
That's right. It just had a hilt and chain too. The way to where they could get provisions and other necessities. So one is which direction you need to go. The other one is where you go to get supplies.
Right.
After traveling many days.
They have 2 of them so that when you're going for supplies, you don't forget which way you're going. You would think you could do that with one spindle, but here's the thing. Okay, I'm sorry. It's always been a problem with the 2 spindles, right? One pointed whither we should go in the wilderness, and the other one's there as a signboard for God to write crap on when he wants to, right? That's kind of what the Book of Mormon says. He remembers the 2 spindles. And one does point the way whither we should go in the wilderness. What's the other one for? Oh,
it does strike me
towards supplies.
It does strike me that Lapham is getting things wrong, but he's clearly talking about the Book of Mormon. That is, he's not so far off as to go like, well, where did he get that from? Like, he's definitely talking Book of Mormon story. It strikes me that Joseph Smith Sr. may have been the one that was getting at least some of these facts wrong, because he didn't know the Book of Mormon well either, which you mentioned here a few minutes ago.
I know you keep coming from that perspective, and I keep coming from the other perspective. There's room in both, I think. I will just say that I'm trying to be as objective as I can be. And it seems to me that the mistakes that this person makes are, every one of them, exactly the kind of mistakes we would expect someone to make when not being able to remember a very detailed account like this exactly over the period of decades.
But he's getting enough right 40 years later. Like I'm actually impressed by how much of the Book of Mormon he is actually nailing.
I would never be able to do that under similar circumstances.
That for Pahoran, McGregor, the guy giving you a hard time, and that's the guy I was talking about at the beginning of the show that was in some of my comments on my post, giving me a hard time too. He wants to just dismiss this out of hand. And I read this and I go, Lapham's got one hell of a memory, and he actually seems to be doing a good job trying to have integrity about the narrative that he tells.
I imagine that Russell McGregor will want to get rid of this telling of the story as well, because it's late, as well as the 1834 Willard Chase affidavit about what Joseph Smith Sr. told him, on a different basis, because it's not late.
Yeah, by the way, just a little side note. Dan's saying apostate is close to apostle. I don't know what conversation he's having, but it reminds me there was a newspaper article from the not Salt Lake Tribune, I think it was Deseret News, and down it was the Quorum of the 12, and underneath it said Quorum of the 12 apostates instead of apostles. It was
no way.
A typo.
Where was that?
Do a search. Go look. Newspaper Quorum of the 12 apostates, and you'll find. I think it's a Deseret News article where they accidentally apostates in place.
They would have to change that by now.
No, I don't. I think the image is there somewhere. I've seen it recently. All right, let me finish this here.
Oh my gosh.
You found it? Share your screen and we'll put it up here in a second. Let me get through this last part, and before we turn the page, we'll do that. All right, directed to get gold plates to keep their records on and transfer to them those already on the brass plates. Finishing these, they resumed their journey, and after traveling many days, came to a wide water where they were directed to build a vessel. When this was completed, by the way, as a no longer believing Mormon, and to anyone else out there, if you are a believer, think about this. Lehi and his family have to ore metals, have to create a billows, have to produce metal plates, have to build a giant ship. You're asking for the ridiculous. And yes, you can go, well, with God, all things are possible. Well, sure, I guess. And I still think you're asking so much. When this was completed, they set sail, still directed by the gold ball. After sailing a long time, they came to land, went on shore, and thence they traveled through boundless. And we'll get to that here in just a second.
They could float over the water too. There they are.
There it is. The Quorum of the
crazy guys. This is 2009. It's the Daily Universe, the BYU student newspaper. And it was reporting on General Conference, and they're all raising their hands and saying, yes, I'm an apostate. Here's what it reads on there. It says, I can't read the whole thing because the whole thing isn't reproduced, but it does say Quorum of the 12 apostates. And apostates is circled in red there.
No greater truth has ever been spoken.
Yes. But of course, because it was true, they changed it immediately. The caption should have said the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, which is the name of the governing body in question. Shocked that the paper was labeling the highest priests in the church as disloyal and unfaithful, thousands of copies of the paper, 18,500 by one report, were pulled from newsstands around the campus. New editions of the paper with a fixed caption, Apostles, were produced and replaced at what must have been enormous cost to BYU and the Daily Universe. The source of the error, says the university spokesperson, right, the person who's there to tell you not the truth. The source of the error was in a spell checker. Why would that be the source of the error? You mean it didn't tell you that you had it wrong, so it's to blame? And working under I'm sorry, what, Bill?
And apostles. So whatever word was spelled wrong, the spell checker thought the closest word that it was likely supposed to be was apostates rather than apostles. And that's sort of.
By the way, they're not talking about a computer. They're talking about a spell checker person. So I guess they could blame them. Working under a tight deadline, of course, the person spell checking the captions ran across a misspelled version of apostles in the text. In a rush, they clicked the first term in the suggestion list, which unfortunately happened to be a similarly spelled near antonym of the word they wanted. I suppose it could happen, but I like the idea that somebody did it on purpose better.
Wouldn't be the first time. All right, I'm going to put this back. Oh, unless you got something else you wanted to read.
That was it. That's all I'm going to read from that article.
All right, so this is yours, but let me finish. Let me get your sentence started. After sailing a long time, they came to land, went on shore, and thence they traveled through boundless.
Sounds like the story of evolution.
Sure.
Across the water, they went on land.
Traveled through.
They went through boundless forests until at length they came to a country where there were a great many lakes, which country had once been settled by a very large race of men who were very rich.
Again, giving credibility to the tall Moroni rather than the short Moroni.
Right, even though these are apparently the Jaredites, which he knows about as well. By a very large race of men who were very rich, having a great deal of money. Now, that's an interesting idea that they were very rich and had a great deal of money, but it makes sense in his narrative because he goes on, from some unknown cause, this nation had become extinct. But that money, said Smith, is here now, every dollar of it.
Treasure digging story.
Yes. When the Jews, first beheld this country, they sent out spies to see what manner of country it was, who reported that the country appeared to have been settled by a very large race of men. If this sounds at all like Caleb and Joshua going into the promised land and scouting it out as the spies of Israel and finding it to be inhabited by giants, it's purely coincidence. And had been, to all appearances, a very rich agricultural and manufacturing nation. They also found something of which they did not know the use. But when they went into the tabernacle, this is that part I was talking about before. When they went into the tabernacle, they got a tabernacle, which is, Nephi says we built a temple like unto the temple of Solomon, right? A voice said, so they find something, they don't know what it's used for, okay? What have you got in your hand there, Mary? They replied that they did not know, but had come to inquire. So obviously this is like what goes on at the veil in the temple, right? That's what John Bradley would emphasize. When the voice said, put it on your face, that doesn't happen in the temple, at least not in any ceremony I've been in. Put it on your face and put your face in a skin, and you will see what it is. They did so and could see everything of the past, present, and future. So we know what it's going to be. It's going to be a rock, right? It's going to be seer stone. And it was the same spectacles that Joseph found with the gold plates. Okay. So these are the spectacles, the ones that are not glass, they're diamonds, remember? And what he's saying is that in this record of the Book of Mormon, there is a story in which the people in the story find what? The interpreters? Remember that story? Find these spectacles that Joseph Smith is going to end up using, and they go to the tabernacle. Now, this is very foreign, I think, to the Book of Mormon. And a voice says, what have you got in your hand there? They replied that they did not know, but had come to, we just found this thing lying on the ground. We're walking through the forest, and we find this weird thing that looks like glasses or spectacles, except they didn't have them, so they didn't know. They replied that they did not know, but had come to inquire through the veil, right? When the voice said, put it on your face. So put the spectacles on your face, put your face in a skin, and you will see what it is. And they do. And it's this means of being able to see everything, past, present, future, just like it did for Joseph Smith, right? Now, what are your thoughts about that?
Just that this, again, is not a Mormon narrative. And I put over to the right, let me get to that spot here so I can see it. I put over there to the right this correlation with treasure digging showing up in the Book of Mormon. Dan Vogel's note is that this belief may have been encouraged by Helaman 13, 17 through 23 and Mormon 1 through 18. And you get this moment, you pointed this out a couple of episodes ago where you were talking about slippery treasures. You know, Joseph has all these treasure digging stories where the treasure slips into the earth if the ritual is not done right. And you have this strange moment in the Book of Mormon where it is using treasure digger language, slippery treasures.
Mm-hmm.
And you look over on the left and you see Lapham talking about these things. It sounds like a treasure digger story. It makes sense that Joseph Smith Sr. in 1829, 1830 is telling a lot of treasure digger story because the religious narrative hasn't gotten there yet. And we know the religious narrative hasn't exactly gotten there yet because treasure digger stuff is still part of the Book of Mormon narrative at the same time.
Yes. And as it goes on, we know that Jesus shows up in the Book of Mormon, but so does this fellow, Fayette Lapham. So here is the first, I mean, it seems that this is the first time we're really talking about Jesus, although we've mentioned apostles before and they're pretty well associated with Jesus. But by and large, it is mostly treasure digging story devoid of any kind of Christian content, at least as we would understand it today. The gold ball stopped here and ceased to direct them any further. Okay, it raises a question. I mean, obviously, one would think they had built the tabernacle, which would mean they had stopped for a considerable period of time to build it. But he's recreating it as best he can. The gold ball stopped here and ceased to direct them any further. The family took possession of the country. Their descendants became a great nation. Among them were prophets who foretold the coming of Christ and said that at a sign of his coming, there would be 3 days in which there would be no night, for the light of day would continue during the 3 days. That's described definitely in the Book of Mormon. In process of time, the sign appeared as foretold by the prophets, and then Christ left Jerusalem. When he did, he came to this nation, and finding them much more perfect and harmonious in their religious views than the Jews were at Jerusalem, especially after he'd killed off all the naughty ones, he was more particular in giving them instruction as to baptism, and said they must go down into the water and be put under the water and come up out of the water. I think all this is quite accurate. But after this, they became corrupt and wicked. Enmity and discord prevailed among them to such an extent that they could no longer dwell together. Hence, they divided up into tribes, were scattered over the face of the earth, and their descendants are the American Indians. And then he concludes by saying, at this point, the interview came to an end, and my friend and myself returned home, fully convinced that we had smelt a large mice. Yes, that's how he puts it, that we had smelt a large mice.
What do you think he meant by that?
I think he meant what we mean when we smell a rat. We smell something that's suspicious. It's not really what it, I can look it up. I looked it up before because I was thought, what is he talking about? And then my research has indicated it's probably the same as when we say, I smell a rat.
Yeah.
You smell something that's suspicious, that's not what it appears to be, or it's presented as being.
Yeah. And then just to sort of make this connection more concrete, and I think this is a great way to sort of end this conversation by doing this, which is the entire night, what we've showed you is that Lapham's interview corroborates with tons of historical sources. His description of the Book of Mormon has so many points of what the Book of Mormon actually is doing and saying that he's definitely aware. He's definitely been told by somebody the narrative of the Book of Mormon, whether that person told it inaccurately or whether he passed it along inaccurately. But there's so many places where he is getting it right. And it's clear that he does, and know that he does, that he was told to some degree what the Book of Mormon is. And then there's all these historical moments that are corroborated in other sources. The treasure guardian being bloody and being a protector of the gold plates, or the article at that point. I walked away from this knowing all the things we covered tonight, and I go, Lapham is pretty credible. He might be off on this or that, but it seems like just the normal mundane kind of stuff to be off on when you're trying to report a big giant story 40 years late. But for the most part, he seems credible and trustworthy about the information he's sharing. And so the whole night, the main gist here is what we just said here at the end, which is this is a treasure digging story. Joseph Smith is a treasure digger, and this entire scheme starts off as a treasure digging narrative. And then on this final slide, and then you've got a couple slides of some cool information you found, but this final slide that I put in, I've got on the left-hand side is all of the sources of people talking about how the treasure would slip away, it sunk into the earth, it would move down, it would sink deeper into the earth. It always sank away at the critical moment. It would sink deeper into the earth every time they came near it. The chest of money was sunk into the earth. And then you go over to the Book of Mormon and you read verse 18 there, the top. And these Gadianton robbers who were among the Lamanites did infest the land, insomuch that the inhabitants thereof began to hide up their treasures in the earth, and they became slippery, because the Lord had cursed the land, and they could not hold them nor retain them again. And then there are these other references of treasures being hidden, treasures being cursed, and it just becomes crystal clear to me that whatever Joseph intended to do, his original scheme was just a treasure digger scheme. And it only became a religious idea and plot somewhere along the way, certainly in time for the Book of Mormon to reflect in large part a religious narrative. Mm-hmm. But that's just not the way it started.
Yeah, by the time these verses or these parts of the Book of Mormon, I think this is probably Helaman chapter 13, verses 17 through 23. Yeah, that's probably what it is. But by the time this part of the Book of Mormon is being translated, it appears that there has been an evolution, at least partial, of the treasure spirit story, where now the treasure can't be found. It's slippery, but it's not because of a treasure guardian and because the people looking for it have run afoul of one of these, conditions that have been put on finding the treasure. It's because God has cursed the land, whatever that means. But that's the substitute for the treasure guardian and the detailed rigmarole you have to do. Now God just curses the land because of your wickedness, and you can't find these treasures that you buried in the earth anymore.
Yep. And then you found some interesting stuff that I thought was pretty cool. So do you want to talk about?
I'm going to do this so fast. I know we're really running late, and it's a short thing, but it's so interesting to me. I'd never heard this before. Let me know if you had. I know Dan has, because he's one of my sources. At least his books are. But Eli Bruce, call me Bruce. Eli Bruce is a guy whose name I never heard of. He got convicted for being involved in the kidnapping and murder of William Morgan in 1826. 1826, William Morgan gets murdered by a bunch of guys who are probably Masons or Mason sympathizers, because he's going to publish a book exposing the secret rituals of Masonry. So he gets abducted and killed. I think it ends up being, I don't know if it gets published posthumously, but Eli Bruce gets convicted of something in association with that. He's sentenced to do like 22 months or something in jail. And guess what happens in October of 1830? Joseph Smith Sr. goes to jail for 30 days. By the way, I wasn't aware of this either. He serves 30 days in the local jail because he's failed to pay off a bill. And it's been going through the civil procedure. And, he just can't pay it. So he goes to debtor's prison for 30 days to see if he'll take it a little bit more seriously in the future. But while he's there, he's sharing a cell, apparently, with this Eli Bruce guy. So we got a situation. We have a situation where not only does William Morgan get kidnapped and murdered, he disappears forever. He was murdered, obviously. And right in Joseph Smith's neighborhood, which is a national sensation. It's on the front pages of all the newspapers. And that happens, okay, in 1826, 4 years before Joseph Smith publishes the Book of Mormon. But strangely, William Morgan's wife ends up being Joseph Smith's wife. Not only does she join the church, she remarries a guy named, I think it's George Washington Harris. I think that's, and her name was Lucy Pendleton. She becomes Lucy Harris. And she ends up being in Missouri. And Joseph Smith goes down there fleeing from Ohio, gets down there, I think, in the spring of 1838, lodges with her and her husband for a period of time, and it's thought by some experts in the subject to have been one of Joseph Smith's early plural wives, and that he had married her during this time period. So that's Lucy Harris. And then, you know what happens with Lucy Harris, right? There's this whole milk strippings thing, where amazingly, Lucy Harris is against the wife of, I think is the president of the apostles, the real apostles, the second apostles, the quorum of the 12. It's Thomas B. Marsh, right? And it's his wife, and she gets in this this dispute about milk strippings with Lucy Harris, the former wife of William Morgan, possibly the current wife of Joseph Smith. We don't know if she's the current wife of Joseph Smith for sure, but what we know is she wins the case at every level. And I've never exactly been clear why it was that she was the one who was believed, but I've got an idea it may have had to do more with her relations than it did with her testimony. So here we have, there we got a great picture of Dan Vogel. I love this picture of him in that velour shirt. Editorial note, Eli Bruce, writes Dan Vogel, was a Mason and the sheriff of Niagara County. So he's a sheriff who was tried and found guilty of conspiracy in the kidnapping of William Morgan, a disaffected Mason who disappeared in 1826, presumed murdered after threatening to publish Masonic secrets. Bruce, that's Eli Bruce, served a 28-month sentence in the Canandaigua jail and there met Joseph Smith Sr., incarcerated for 30 days for an unpaid debt. Masonry is all over Mormonism and possibly, just possibly, even on the second to the top gold plate. Hey, Bruce. I said Bruce. Hey, Bill.
Sir.
You want to read? This is in Eli Bruce's journal from November 5th, 1830.
November 5th. Not so much pain in my head as yesterday. Had a long talk with the father of the smith, who, according to the old man's account, is the particular favorite of heaven. To him, heaven is vouchsafed to reveal its mysteries. He is the herald of the latter-day glory. The old man avers that he is commissioned by God to baptize and preach this new doctrine. He says that our Bible is much abridged and deficient, that soon the divine will is to be known to all, as written in the new Bible or Book of Mormon.
I know that in some ways the world is smaller today than it was back then if we talk about communications and transportation. In other ways, I think the world was a lot it's bigger then than it is now, okay? But when it comes to the number of people in it, the population, I think the world was a lot smaller place back then. At any rate, we've got these amazing coincidences. Of course, William Morgan had lived and died in New York, and yet here's Joseph Smith Sr. sharing a jail cell, or at least a jail, with a guy who had been found guilty of conspiracy in the kidnapping of William Morgan. And later on, William Morgan's wife, widow, joins the LDS Church and may have ended up secretly marrying Joseph Smith.
And you're positioning it, I'll just say really quickly, you're positioning it like maybe my best understanding is that most historians, I think including Brian Hales, faithful apologist of the church, conclude that Lucinda Harris was almost certainly a plural wife of Joseph Smith.
I think Compton believes that. I think he wrote that in his book. But all these things happen in the there's 1826, and then these other things happen, 1830, and then there's 1838 with Lucinda Harris. But all these things happen with the Book of Mormon, and the Book of Mormon, dictated 1829, has a decidedly anti-Masonic overtone. And by the 1840s, though, Joseph Smith is incorporating Masonic rituals into his new temple ceremony.
Also, if you don't buy into that Fanny Alger was the first plural wife of Joseph Smith, because that was just a filthy, nasty affair of a transaction seen through the peak hole of a barn, if I'm not mistaken, Lucy Harris would have been Joseph Smith's first plural wife.
I think she would have been very early, yes. And I can't remember the number, but it was certainly very early. It would have been 1838. So yes. Okay. So that is the end really of that. Is there anything else after that? This where we talk about William Morgan. There's Morgan's Freemasonry. That's why I thought it might have been published posthumously. And then the referencing to the podcast Make Way for Milk Strippings, where I talk about Lucinda Pendleton and this whole aspect of her possibly being a plural wife of Joseph Smith and how that may have factored into the decision of the court that she was in the right when it came to the milk strippings. And there's your ball game coming right in at 2 hours, 59 minutes, and 39 seconds.
And I did put the link for people to join the show. Nobody did. So
thank God.
We'll just end it here.
Nothing personal.
Yeah.
No the hour is late.
Yeah, it's late. But I think that was a lot of fun, and I hope folks you enjoyed it. We'd love to know what you think. So please, in the live chat or in the comments down below, if you'll put what you think about the Joseph Smith Sr. interview, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and thank you so much for watching. Please hit like, please hit subscribe, and do us the biggest favor. Would you go to mormonismlive.org, click donate? Can you imagine the kind of time it takes to sit with these sources, to make underlines, to go find documents, to put some images up to help entertain you as you watch this, and then to have an intelligent, informed discussion about these topics. And by the way, a big thanks to Dan Vogel for all your work on the Joseph Smith interview, your footnotes and things that you had studied and researched around this were just so helpful. So thank you to you as always for being a part, sort of on the outside looking in, but one that we utilize constantly on our show. Folks, this was Mormonism Live. Tune in Friday for Mormonism After Dark, Monday night for the Mormon Newscast. Otherwise, we'll see you on the flip side next Wednesday for another episode of Mormonism Live. RFM, kudos to you. And folks, thanks for listening. Have a great night, and we'll talk to everybody soon. Bye-bye.
Good night.